Okay, sure, yeah, and I can control it from here.
On the blue because
Yep, perfect, yep, perfect, yep, thanks. And I'll control it all from here. I'm good with PowerPoint. Yeah, no, that's fine. What order on the agenda? Second or? Okay, thanks. Yep, thank you. Okay, well,
no, whatever you prefer. Is right.
thanks.
Good morning, everyone. We now have quorum, and we're going to start the meeting. Paul, have a seat. I would like to call the meeting to order. Ferguson, sit down. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well as a reminder, all electronic devices, please shut them down. You don't want to annoy me. Changes to the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Madam Chair, no, there are no changes this morning.
Thank you. So are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Farr, Mayor Eisenberger, all those in favor? Thank you. So I'd like to call upon Lori-Ann Spence-Smith, Chair, to provide the presentation for the Hamilton Library Board. Councillor Pearson?
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you, and to the board members as they're setting up. I did go up and just give them a heads up that we didn't finish till after 11 p.m. last night, so we're doing our best to get, we have quorum here today, and we'll all be very attentive, but just so you understand that it was a long evening. Thank you.
I think Councillor Pearson said her chair was still warm when she got back here this morning. So, Lori-Ann, good morning.
Good morning. My name is Lori Spence-Smith, and I am the chair of the Hamilton Public Library Board. The Library Board is made up of 9 citizen volunteer members and 2 dedicated councillors, Councillor Partridge and Councillor Pearson. This morning, I would like to start by reviewing the numbers, then highlight the key accomplishments of the past year, and finally, talk briefly about the new strategic plan. The Library Board's 2018 budget is at a 1.8% increase, which represents an increase of $535,330. We appreciate the ongoing support of City Council, which enables residents to receive excellent public library service. The Library Board also understands the financial pressures you face, and we work closely with staff to ensure that all the funding we receive is used effectively. Here's a summary of the proposed 2018 operating budget. The largest budget pressure for 2018 is the increase in minimum wage, which impacts our library page positions. The change would have resulted in a $254,000 increase to our budget. However, we have reduced our budgeted casual staff hours by 9,000, from 130,000 to 121,000 hours. This has allowed us to significantly reduce that pressure. The second biggest pressure is a city-driven increase in our direct facilities cost allocation. This relates to costs incurred by the city that are directly related to the library or directly related to both city and library shared facilities. There are also several positive budget drivers. With both the Binbrook and Dundas construction projects nearing completion, we will be moving out of the temporary lease locations soon. Using lean principles, we have looked at our inter-branch courier processes and have now brought both the urban and rural routes in-house. This has eliminated the need to use a contracted service. With this has resulted in an increase to our vehicle expenses budget it has created an overall budget savings of $30,000. We've been able to increase our budget for makerspace and photocopier usage by $10,000 and $17,000 respectively because of increased utilization. Finally, the Library Board continues to invest in technology to reduce repetitive tasks. System-wide, our rate of customer self-checkout now exceeds 90%. Our 2018 budget proposes an FTE count of 300, which is down from 305 last year. The Library Board is participating in the city's new multi-year budgeting and business planning initiative. This slide shows the 2019 to 2021 forecast. 2019 is expected to be another challenging year with the second phase of the minimum wage increase taking effect. The budget is expected to stabilize thereafter. In 2017, Hamilton Public Library completed a return on investment study, or ROI study, using the same methodology that other library systems have followed, including Toronto, Burlington, and London. Our results are similar to other public libraries. We understand that Council needs to make difficult decisions about what services to fund, but we encourage you to understand that the Hamilton Public Library budget is an investment in our community. Every dollar invested in the Hamilton Public Library gets returned to the community more than five-fold in the form of materials used and circulated, programs attended, digital technology accessed, and so on. Hamilton Public Library's economic impact per household is $765 or $301 per resident, which is remarkable when you consider that the average household in Hamilton pays $118 in taxes for library services. That's a net benefit of $647 per household. We thought it was important to measure the economic impact of the library. However, as a public library, we are really focused on creating as much social good as we can, given the investments that we receive. As we strive for greater effectiveness internally, we keep an eye on how we compare with the major library systems in Canada. The annual report from the Municipal Benchmarking Network of Canada, MBN Canada, released in November, revealed that the Hamilton Public Library's total cost per use is down to $1.78. That's 23 cents below the median of our peers. One way to measure the efficacy of library collections is how well it is used. Overall, our items circulated an average of 6 times per year. Again, this is well above the average of our peers. As you can see from this graph, which represents visits and circulation, usage of the public library continues to be strong. We have managed to modestly reduce our overall FTE count in the last decade, as we have seen increases in usage. The Hamilton Public Library, like other public libraries, continues to help create a level playing field for all residents when it comes to access to technology. Over 500 free public computers get used approximately 800,000 times annually, while usage of our free Wi-Fi continues to grow. 2017 was a successful year for the Hamilton Public Library. I would now like to take this opportunity to share some of the highlights with you. Addressing gaps in library service hours has been a major focus of 2017 and will continue to be in 2018. This is so important because people use the library spaces for studying, accessing technology, and connecting with their community. In 2017, we made significant progress in addressing gaps without adding to our overall staff complement. I am pleased to report that we are the first public library in Canada to use remote support technology to expand our hours at the Freelton branch from 17 hours to 60 hours per week. Freelton is staffed 4 hours per day in person, and at other times, staff at Central supervise the space remotely. So far, the Freelton pilot has been a success, and we will be looking to expand to our other rural locations in the future. The pop-up library and the bookmobiles continue to bring the library to where people are. We are also pleased to report that in early 2017, we reached a new 4-year collective agreement with CUPE Local 932. Work on the renewal of our facilities continues. The new expanded Binbrook branch will be opening later this week. This will be followed by the opening of the newly renovated Dundas branch. We will be tendering for the Lock branch project earlier this year. Design of the new community hub in Greensville is almost complete, and the design of our new Valley Park branch is underway. Replacing the original central windows is about to begin, which will improve the energy efficiency of that building. And this past year, we also completed a feasibility study for the Carlisle branch. Research shows that developing a love of reading significantly improves educational outcomes. The Hamilton Public Library continues to make reading fun and supports parents in raising the next generation of readers. We also work to promote Canadian and local authors. This year, we were pleased to have award-winning Hamiltonian author Gary Barwin as the writer-in-residence for Hamilton Public Library and McMaster University. Libraries provide core access to technology. In 2017, we expanded our access to advanced equipment around the system. The equipment and training that we provide supports skills development and provides entrepreneurs and artists with specialized equipment to support their businesses. Providing equitable access to information and intellectual freedom are cornerstones of thriving democracies. At the Hamilton Public Library, we focus on providing quality fiction and nonfiction, research and learning materials in both physical and digital forms. The Library Board is developing a new strategic plan to take us to 2021. The new plan will build on the success of the current plan. We will continue to align our priorities with current and future needs. We will continue to align our priorities with important community initiatives that are making Hamilton a better place. We will continue to support efforts like the city's culture plan, our Future Hamilton community vision, to lend our support to a shared better future for all. In October and November of 2017, we conducted a community survey to better understand the needs of residents. That did not use the library. We received over 7,000 responses. The survey also asked people to respond to questions about the values of library. We were pleased to see that near complete support for our core missions, including support among non-users. Overall, satisfaction was very high. However, a few areas of potential improvement were identified, and they include hours, Wi-Fi, programs, and ebook selection. High level of satisfaction, but we know that we need to work on awareness and some other areas. Services while we remain mindful of the budget challenges that Council faces. We will continue to build on efforts to better engage seniors and help them discover their creative talents. Hamilton Public Library is a forward-looking organization, helping people prepare for the future. Part of preparing for the future is capturing and preserving the past and present so it is available for future generations. We will continue to make more of our local history collection available in digital formats for free to support education and research. At the Hamilton Public Library, we celebrate and provide access to diverse cultural experiences for everyone. To build empathy and understanding, we help newcomers feel welcome so they can learn and grow. Cultural development is one tool in the toolbox of building a better city. Culture transforms cities, fosters open, tolerant, and innovative communities, and makes a significant and positive impact on our economy. As we move forward with the new strategic plan, we will ensure that we continue to support the city's culture strategy and the Province of Ontario's culture plan. Before we open up to questions, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Library Board, library staff, and everyone who uses and loves the Hamilton Public Library. We are grateful for the continued support of Council. We could not do this without all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lori-Ann. Well done. And I also see you have brought your cheering section with you.
I did.
Thank you for all your work, folks. And we have Councillors Pearson and Councillor Conley. One moment, please. Councillor Pearson.
Madam Chair and Lori-Ann, excellent job. And just for committee's information, Lori-Ann has just been appointed chair because we rotate chair every year. And this is actually, she just started in January, so she's did an excellent job. You did an excellent job.
1 week on the job.
Exactly. And two have been since 2003. This is another one of these boards where they're so quiet, but they get so much done. And as you saw through the slide presentation, I won't go into everything, but highlights again, I mean, there's so many things that the library does that people just don't understand. I mean, with the building of Binbrook, and I had the opportunity to tour it with Councillor Partridge on Saturday. Councillor Brent, so fortunate. And to have taken in, you know, consideration of the area where it went in, the historical value of the neighborhood, it's just phenomenal. I hope all of my members, I hope everybody goes out and sees and tours and uses the Binbrook Library. It's just beautiful. So with the Binbrook Library, with the Dundas Library, there were a number of issues that they had to deal with. Councillor Vanderbeek's well aware of, and you know, they just took it in stride, and everything got dealt with. And I have to say, I have to commend Paul, because they're so steadfast, and you know, we're going to get through this. Lock Street's on the horizon coming along. Next will be Valley Park, as you mentioned, Greensville. So there's so many things going on, and people don't realize these are revitalization or renewals of all our existing facilities throughout the whole city of Hamilton. And I just commend everybody. I did want to ask one question, though, because I've gone on, and I'm sorry that Councillor Jackson's not here, because Councillor Jackson is a huge ally of the library, and has been a member for many, many years, and I know he served with him for a number of years, and he's always so passionate in speaking in support of the library, and it's too bad that he can't be here. But I did want to ask, because I think it would be worthwhile for the committee to know. You mentioned, Lori-Ann, and whether you wanted to explain it further, or Paul, the Freelton Library and how we do the access without it being manned by people. Can you explain that? Certainly, thank you.
Thank you for the
Paul.
question. Good morning. So the Freelton pilot is based on a remote support model, and this is something that's been done mainly in Northern Europe and a couple places in the US, but we're the first ones to bring it to Canada. And basically we're utilizing technology. So we have video coverage of the whole area. We have people have their library cards. They scan the library card and have to type in their PIN for the doors to open. We're only open during hours when there's remote support, so there's staff at Central with a two-way phone that anyone can pick up the phone and have that two-way support. And so it's worked very well, and what we find is that unfortunately in some of our rural branches, because they serve such a small catchment area, they haven't been open the best hours, and so turning Freelton from 17 to 60 hours really makes a big difference. And so we're expecting that this model is not something that we're anticipating we'd use in our urban and suburban areas, but we look at our rural locations that don't have the best hours. And I know, so this is a way that we can provide value to those communities. And we know, and we're doing an assessment of location of usage, that if we didn't have Freelton open, there'd be some use that would transfer to other branches, but some usage wouldn't. And we want people living in those rural communities to be able to have convenient access to the library.
Thank you for the explanation, and I think it's valuable that not only around this table we hear it, but the viewing public hears it. So, Madam Chair, I will close and just say, you will see that the library has been very diligent over the years of coming in at or below the budget request that we put out. This year they are a little higher, and unfortunately it has to do with issues that are out of their control, being the minimum wage, being direct facilities costs that have increased, that the library board has no control over these. So I know they're very, very audacious in making sure that they count every penny, and as was also mentioned, reducing staffing to try and address some of these issues. So they've targeted every area that they possibly can, and I certainly will support this going forward at the appropriate time. But I want to thank everyone again. It's a pleasure to work with all of the members on this board and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Conley?
Thank you. Very good presentation. I just want to talk about Valley Park for a little bit because that's where I live. And the new library that's going in there, and I'm really pleased to hear that it's going forward. But I just wanted to mention, and I know you guys appreciate it as much as I do, the $1.24 million that the Heritage Green Trust is putting into this project. It's very important. It might not even started without it, or it wouldn't have been the size it's going to be without it. So I thought they should be mentioned and recognized for the work that they're doing for this library. And I know they're long range. You're actually looking for another place, I think, in Lower Stony Creek. And I haven't got an answer for you yet, though, but keep looking. And Maria and I are looking, too. And hopefully something can be done down there to just finish off the community. So thank you very much for your presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and great job. Great job. Newbie on the job, 1 week, but you did really, really well. So just a couple of questions, and these may be for Paul. Paul, I want to zero in on the minimum wage discussion because certainly what you've presented today is considerably lower than where we started out. And, I must say, every board meeting, and I'm absolutely honored to be on this board because every board meeting, there isn't just one or two people that tend to, ask all the questions, and it's everybody around that table. And, I so appreciate the engagement. But if you could just unpack a bit more, as is appropriate, where we started with the minimum wage and where we've ended up.
So the minimum wage increase this year would have been a $244,000 impact on our budget. We've got that down to about $100,000, a bit over that. And how we did it is we knew that Council was debating potentially adopting a living wage. And so for the last couple of years, we've been really very strict controls on new hiring of casual staff because we anticipated that there would be potentially that increase coming either through an increase in the minimum wage or if council decided to adopt a living wage. So we cut 9,000 hours out of our budget.
Right.
That's not going to cut the hours for existing staff or cut existing staff. So we've been working on this for a couple of years, anticipating it. So that's how we've been able to get that down. So no one's being laid off, but we have asked all of our branches and all our departments to really take a hard look at how many hours they're allocated. And there's really been a great leadership from around the system where people have come forward and said, you know what, we can give up these hours. And we've looked at that. So that's how we've been able to get that that down. And obviously that will have next year when we go up to $15, that will also have an impact next year.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I think that just speaks to, for any business really knowing, but the library in particular, knowing that the minimum wage was coming, has been preparing for this for 2 years. And I think that's just one of the key reasons that the library certainly is so successful, because, this board does not wait for things to happen. They plan, they pre-plan, they anticipate. There's great discussion well ahead of what could potentially we be looking at in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that's really key. So I commend your staff and all of you on that. But I want to come back to the Waterdown branch. It certainly has been a great success, certainly more than anticipated. The community hub, and I see several of the libraries have what I call a true community hub setup, and I would use Waterdown as the example. We've got the senior center, which of course was built into, and I think our senior membership in a couple of the groups was around that 200 mark, 150 to 200, and now it's well over 400. And that place is humming every day. And in fact, I would suggest that the archives are there, the Flamborough archives. And this is, repeated in communities all around our city where the library has become a part of and a real hub and a conduit of information, but also a place where people can gather and come together for different services, not just for the library. The remote support, that has been a phenomenal success. And I want to just talk a bit, coming back to Waterdown, with that remote support. Are there plans to introduce that? Certainly there's libraries that don't have Friday hours, and that's one of the things that I do hear from my residents. PA days are always on a Friday. The library isn't open. How can we rectify that? Can you just speak to that?
So currently to set up the pilot, because Central had the most capacity, we have the remote support happening at Central. But the vision is going forward is that a Freelton, or if you had expanded hours at Carlisle, they could be supported by Waterdown. If Linden's hours were expanded, the staff at Ancaster would play a role in supporting that, because they already they're part of the same cluster. So that's something that we're looking at down the road. And we've committed to the board a report in April where it is a pilot, so we're evaluating the risks and benefits. So far we've been very pleased that we haven't had any issues, and that's been the experience of other communities that have done this. So after we give that initial assessment, we'll then start planning and working with councillors in rural wards about what our plans are for how we can expand service.
And thank you. I just think that's a tremendous opportunity to be able to serve customers more. And so, Madam Chair, those are my questions and my comments. But like I say, I'm absolutely thrilled with the work that the library does, and how conscientious the board is, and certainly your senior staff as well, coming together and working to make sure that the budget is adhered to. Thank you.
Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Deputy Mayor.
That doesn't matter.
So through you, yeah, had to think about that one. Thank you. What a great presentation. It was really nice to have the slides as background and the story adaptive about finding space and making that space welcoming. And I have had not one single complaint about the temporary space in Dundas. And in fact, I've had many people tell me how much they like it. So kudos to everybody that was involved in that. And I know that it's been a lot of work for Paul and Karen and many others that are involved, including the board, to make that project come full circle. And so we're really looking forward to the end of it, I guess, or perhaps the beginning of it, really, the new beginning there. So thank you. I also want to note that when I have a need to get in touch with the staff, Paul and Karen and whoever else at the library about something about Dundas or whatever, it's such a pleasure to deal with you. And the responsiveness and your resourcefulness is greatly appreciated. So I think that sometimes we don't pat people on the back enough. I want to make a very direct point of saying that today. So thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation. And Councillor Pearson asked my question, which was about the 60 hours in the remote. So congratulations on working that out, because I'm sure that is a huge appreciated, successful way to manage the rural area, and I'm sure that people are very grateful. So thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you, and Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you, and thank you, Lori-Ann, for a great presentation. Good first effort. I'm sure there'll be another one next year, I'm pretty sure.
Hope so.
And I'm very jealous of the enthusiasm of the library board. You know what? I've never sat on it. I think I want to, because it's a great crowd. You know, usually what happens when we get these presentations, we get maybe the chair and the CEO, and then no one else shows up. And I'm pretty sure that's the entire board. And, you know, they're all happy and smiling, and you know, the enthusiasm for this work is very palpable. And we've been blessed by that over the years, by former directors and current director Paul, and the great work they do to engineer, you know, creative, innovative, and pleasant spaces. And I think that permeates throughout the library. So thank you for all that. I'm also jealous about the tackle-a-tie that I see there, which is awesome. I don't know if that's a library issue, but I want one, whatever it is. And you know what, the continuing innovation that's happening, you know, I said this last year, I'll say again, you know, 20 years ago, we might have thought that libraries would have been obsolete. It is, you know, completely the opposite. It's become, you know, centers for innovation, community hubs, actually development of culture in, you know, all the different spaces that we occupy. And the library board and our leadership has just done a great job of staying out ahead of the need and fulfilling that need and continuing to nurture that kind of innovative cultural hubs that they've become. So I couldn't be happier. The city of Hamilton is kind of on that same space, and I think you're adding to that. Your work and your enthusiasm, and you're continuing to build and renew on all of those great little spaces that we have throughout our entire community. Really adds to the vitality and cultural capacity of our great community. So thank you for all your great work. Fully understand, you know what, we knew this was going to be a challenging year for many budgets as a result of the minimum wage, and I think you've demonstrated to a lot of other folks out there that are complaining about the minimum wage issue that there are ways that you can deal with that and still provide the benefit for those in our community that are going to get benefit by an improved minimum wage. So you've shown some good techniques in terms of how you can manage that. So thank you all very much. And if there's an opportunity, can I get on the board at some point? I'll volunteer. If there's an opening, let me know. Let me know. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, please don't turn off your mic. I'd like to turn the chair over to you. So put the request back in, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, Paul and Karen, thank you very much for the construction on Bimbrook, in Bimbrook. I not only got to tour it when the drywall was just going up, I got to tour it again last week just before everyone else came in. Your second to the last slide shows that preserving Hamilton's past. That was the one key thing for me that just, it resonates, because we tried to do that throughout the whole community, is to remind people that, you know, Bimbrook was founded in 1792, and here's some of the old pictures, and you have several walls in the Bimbrook Library that demonstrate that. So there are pictures of the Binbrook Fair in 1902. There are pictures of the fair, and it is just amazing. And as soon as you walk in, it's a conversation piece. Then you walk into the next room, there's another conversation piece. And the lady who took us around, and my brain is fried right now, and I cannot remember her name.
Carol Wilkinson.
Sorry?
Carol Wilkinson.
Thank you. And Carol pointed to one of the pictures, and it was her mother at the age of 5. So it was just, it's so wonderful, and the staff up there are so enthusiastic, as they are in Mount Hope and the rest of the libraries I've visited. So, Lorianne, as I said at the very beginning, your presentation was awesome. Thank you very much for coming in to do this. 1 week's worth. I can't wait to see you next year. So now I'm still going on first-time speakers. I'll take the chair back. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh,
You're welcome.
thank you. So I'm going to Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm with the mayor in this. I'm impressed the whole board shows up, or just about the whole board. I don't think we have that with many other boards and agencies that come out, and we had conservation authorities all day Tuesday. And to see this shows the enthusiasm towards what they do and the love for what they do, because they're taking time off work, I assume, away from their families to be here. But that's not going unnoticed. So congratulations to the board for coming out. Did I hear you also say that you're looking to extend the hours in Ancaster? I heard you pick it up with Linden. I just want to follow now in Ancaster.
Well, we're not going to outrule anything at this point, but we're not looking at Ancaster specifically right now. But yeah, you know, hours are always an issue. Like I said, it was one of the things that were represented from our 7,000 survey responses. So we will be looking at hours over the entire system-wide, but specifically Ancaster at this point.
No changes in 2018 then in Ancaster?
Not on the horizon at this point, no. Of course, yeah.
Just to add to that, what the board has got us to do is to do a 4-stage addressing gaps in hours. We've done 2 of them where we've added hours, and then we've assessed how we've done, and then we've added more hours, and we've assessed what we've done. And so we have another report coming in in May, June of this year, and then November, December. So we are starting to look out. I think the thing is there were 5 principles that the board adopted in directing us. One was geographic balance, so that we have to look at the mountain, lower city, east, west, that kind of thing, addressing higher need neighborhoods, making sure that there is a big impact on service. Shared facilities is also one. So I wouldn't say, I'd say Ancaster is sort of on the list. I know Waterdown is also, we've been hearing a lot about Waterdown. So we're just taking, so I don't want to promise anything right now, but what I can tell you is the board is challenging us to figure out ways that we can open on these closed days and figure out ways that we can effectively enhance service. I know at Linden, one thing we did at Linden was we switched hours. We didn't expand their hours, but we talked to community, and there was a real interest in more daytime hours by seniors in the community, so we switched the hours. So I think what you could look forward to, without a commitment today, but we'd work with you to get information from the residents of Ancaster about what their preference would be. And so that's something that we're going to continue to do. We had planned this as a 2-year journey, and we're halfway through that. And I could easily see this, it's been going very well. I think the one thing that we have to be very careful of, though, is, and one of the principles is sustainability. What we don't want to do is we don't want to add hours to one of your branches and then 6 months later say, you know what, we really can't handle this, so we're going to claw them back. That's probably worse than not offering them in the first place. So that's just the caution that we're trying to be.
And I'm not really pushing for it that hard, because I think my community's got used to it. I know a lot of kids like to do projects, and they because the spray pad's there, and they pour in, want to use that, and the new tennis courts and the lawn bowling green. So we do get scarcity of parking, and of course when you're close on parties, it does open up some space. So I personally have mixed feelings on it, but I'm just curious where we're going to go with that. I want to congratulate the benchmarking too. There's nothing better than benchmarking against your peers, and you score highly on that too. So clearly you're running the place right. That's always the ultimate test is key performance indicators and how you stack up against your competitors, for lack of a better word. So congratulations on that. The only other question I have is in slide 16, you talk about replacing central windows and doors. Is these the glass facade? out on York Boulevard?
It's the windows, like the actual of the building, not the facade.
But the windows are the facade on the...
So,
Excuse me, can
not
I
the
ask
first
you
floor.
to, excuse me, can I ask you to talk into the microphone? You
Sorry.
can bend it so that it's directed more to you.
Yeah, so it's not the first floor, it's the floors above that. The windows have never been replaced. They are the original windows that are still part of that building, so it'll be replacing all of those windows.
Okay, and to you, Madam Chair, I was concerned that we put a lot of money into that
No.
that facade and you're tearing it
No, the
apart.
board loves that facade.
They're from 1979.
The other windows that we are replacing.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
First-time speaker, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Good morning. Sorry, Laurie, Suzanne, Paul, for being late this morning. Couldn't get off the phone with a constituent at home. But I've just scanned through your presentation, and I'll say, as I say every year, since amalgamation, which, of course, lots of consternation across our community at that time of 6 municipalities in the region being brought together in a merger, some liked, some did not like, the library and library services and the system of libraries in Hamilton Public Library has been one of our great success stories. They've done a yeoman's job. They've looked after, in my humble opinion, every geographic area of the city. They have not just concentrated on one particular urban area. They've looked after the suburban communities. I remember when I was on the library at the time with Councillor Pasuta, we got the new Linden branch built, set the stage for the Waterdown branch, Bimbrook, etc. Of course, the new Turner one that opened about 5-6 years ago, plus looking after the existing facilities. So great work all around. It's always been a great eclectic group. I've always called it that's a representative on the board. They're passionate about library services. I'm sure, Paul, you mentioned it because I prepared you, but just tell me again, how is the Ed and Connie Dollar Foundation doing in terms of supporting our two wonderful bookmobiles? Madam Deputy Mayor, through you to Paul.
So we've had a great year with the bookmobile, and we continue to do that. And we are looking at reviewing and seeing how we can get better utilization of our bookmobile. I'd say one thing that's happened this year is that we've been getting the bookmobile out at more community events.
Terrific.
So that exposing people to the library that aren't exposed. And so the bookmobile is such a great ambassador for library services. And so we continue to do that. It's like in Dundas where we, temporary location is next to the beer store. We've gotten some new people because we're next to the beer store. So sometimes we have to get the library out from where people normally think of the library.
Very creative, Chief Librarian, very creative. I just want to say for those who may not remember the names Ed and Connie Dowler, D-O-W-L-E-R, just a sweet couple who didn't have any weren't blessed with children. And I believe now about 20 years ago, their last year of their life, they both lived together at Macassa Lodge. And when they passed on, they left their entire estate. I believe, Paul, if memory serves me right, it was in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. They left the entire estate to Hamilton Public Library Services, earmarked for the bookmobile service, because they knew that that would get out to shut-ins and seniors and others that otherwise wouldn't have the capability to get to branches. And I want to thank Councillors Pearson and Partridge for their outstanding work liaising with council and their representation on the board. Keep up the great work, Laurie, Suzanne, and I miss you guys enormously. Take care. Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Pasuta.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and welcome to Council Chambers, and your presentation is very encouraging and well done. So a few questions to you, Madam Chair, and whoever can answer this. The Linden Library, at this point in time, the uptake and the use of it, is it holding, is it increasing, do we know?
So after we opened the new Linden Library, we saw about a doubling of usage. So both in terms of circulations and visits, so it was up over 50%, it really doubled. And we've seen that stay pretty steady. So it is being well used, and it's holding its own. I know one thing is we like to look at the hours there potentially at Linden, that would provide more use. And I think what we know is that in the rural areas especially, the people appreciate the Wi-Fi and the fact that there's study space and space for the kids to do their homework has really helped that usage stay strong.
Okay, thank you for that one. Next one, the Frilton Library is mentioned quite a few times, and way out far yonder by me down there. It's good to get Frilton on the map. At this point in time, you're pleased with the response that's happening there then?
Yes, we're pleased, and I think there's been no problems, and so I think when you offer expanded hours, one of the things we know is that it takes time for people to realize that they're actually open on a Friday, what they're not used to. So it continues to be, and I think what we're finding is that people in the community, they really love it. When you come in the morning, mom's there with their kids picking up some materials, and they really appreciate the fact that they can use the library when it's convenient for them, not having to fit into that 4-hour window.
Oh, that's great. If I may, Madam Deputy Mayor, the Greensville School is a little bit behind time, but still moving forward, and the library continues to be part of it. We got some drawings down here. The hours on it, any idea at this point in time what the hours may be for it?
We discussed this at the board, and I think the board was likely, the Freelton pilot was part of the impetus for that was we were looking at that for Greensville. So I think we're looking, assuming that the pilot continues to go well, we'd be looking at the new Freelton having hours similar to that Greensville having hours similar to Freelton. So that's something that we're looking at, and it's definitely the design is built so that we could secure the collection and have access for multiple hours. So we don't know exactly what that's going to be, but every indication is that we'll be looking at similar hours to it.
Madam Chair, a couple more questions. Through you. The bookmobile continues to be coming to Rockton. What's the hours, what days does it come there? Through Madam Chair.
Thursdays evenings? Yeah. Thursday evening from 6 to 8. And it continues to do very well. In fact, I know the first year that we opened the Rockton bookmobile stop, it did half the use that the Rockton Library used to get. So it's very popular. We added a stop at Millgrove after we opened Waterdown and closed Millgrove. And so I think we see bookmobile as a good complementary service in rural communities.
Okay, if I may, Madam Chair. So we talked about Rockton. Now we got the new Beverly School coming into play, and I guess I've heard that it's supposedly going to be built by 2019 if things move along. Seems MTO's getting in gear there, things are happening. And Paul, we did talk about at one point in time having a drop-off for books at the school or some kind of a mechanism or new technologies. Is that still in the queue?
We haven't talked about that recently, so I think that's something that we should be connecting with you this year to talk about. So we have no concrete plans at this point, but certainly we'd be open to talking to you about that and seeing how we could extend the service.
Okay, that's great. Just in closing, I have to say to Paul, your staff, and the library board, just thank you for all you do. It's important in the community to have that out there, have for our youth and the seniors to have access to all of this. It's very important. Thank you.
I almost thought you were going 5 minutes. And last time speaker, Councillor Pearson, second time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I certainly appreciate being able to open with comments and questions and close. So, as has been evidenced, phenomenal board to be on, but a couple of points that have raised as comments have come around the table. The board handles these challenges very well. And I tell you, the board members, it was mentioned, Councillor Vanderbeek, about Dundas. We had an issue with Dundas with regards to the roof. I'll tell you, there was very heated debate around the table at the board. Why did this happen and why are we doing this? So the members there are very passionate about everything that is done and how money is spent. And I'm so proud of that. I'm just going to touch on as well as pre-amalgamation, Councillor Jackson raised. I was on the Wentworth board at pre-amalgamation, so those are all the outlying boards. And I'll tell you, it was great, but they were very, very frugal. And what they could hold off, because at that time you tried to do what you can with the minimal dollars that you had, they did. But with amalgamation and now everybody being in one pot, the library board has taken that and run with it and certainly improved all of the surrounding libraries as well to be as complimentary as our Hamilton proper library. So just ecstatic about that. And I just want to mention one more thing about Binbrook, because I think our colleagues here should know. The one amazing thing that I saw when I was up at Binbrook, and Madam Chair, they may have pointed out to you, is the electrical services in the floor. So the library is on a raised, or 4-foot foundation, and there's a space of about 8 or 10 inches under the floor that is totally accessible. So the electrical can all be moved around without having to do major renovations. How forward-thinking is that? I was just so impressed. And again, it's the staff, it's the contractors, just thinking of how we can make sure that the dollar is spent efficiently and looking at not wasting it going forward into the future. So again, certainly commend everybody on the board, staff and board members. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Anne-Marie. Lorianne, awesome job. I told you, I've had one coffee today. I usually have 7 by now. Thank you very much. I need a motion, please, to receive the presentation. Moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Partridge. All those in favor? Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now I would like to call upon Eric Miller, the Treasurer, to provide the presentation for the Hamilton Farmers Market Board. And I believe we have Mr. Arntz here as well. Just want to acknowledge that he's in the audience, and he's the Chair. Good morning, Eric.
Morning.
Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Eric Miller. I am the volunteer treasurer of the Hamilton Farmers Market Board. If you're interested, when I'm not volunteering on the board of the Farmers Market or shopping there, I am a sole proprietor economist, and I am also a lecturer at York University. This is a complementary interest, no doubt, to the idea of the market and my interest in economics. I'd like to point out our chair is Wilf Arndt. If you could just raise his hand in the audience. Wilf, unfortunately, has a bad cold such that it's actually destroyed his voice, and so he's not able to share his opening remarks here, but he would have otherwise with us. Just a reminder, on our board, we have 11 board members, 11 voting members, 2 councillors, Councillor Farr and Councillor Pizzuta. We have 4 vendors of the Hamilton Farmers Market on our board as well, and we have 5 citizen members on the board. We also have 2 ex officio members who are non-voting on our board. Also like to recognize our general manager, Bill Sloka, in the audience as well. If you can raise your hand there. Thank you. So our presentation of Budget 2018. In your package, there is a message from the chair of the board, from Wilf. Just of note, this is the 180th year of the Hamilton Farmers Market, a true treasured long-term institution, and it's a pleasure for all of us on the board to be stewarding that in that spirit of longevity and adaptiveness and so on. Going into the budget submission, and our budget submission, we are asking for a levy increase of $1,650, which meets Council's 2018 guideline increase of 1.5%. And so that makes the levy, that would make the levy in 2018 to be $111,000. Against this additional contribution from a city council, from the city, we have our own source revenue. We are increasing our own source revenue by $120,000 in budget 2018 as compared to budget 2017. A significant part of that, the single biggest item as part of that revenue increase, is an increase in stall rents. As compared to budget 2017, budget 2018 that we are proposing, would have $58,000 more of rent. That's a function both of an increased occupancy of rentable area in the market and also a function of a 2% rent increase across the board. We are also fortunate to have an additional $31,000 within fiscal year 2018 from Meridian Credit Union, which is offering a sponsorship of $125,000 per year. Against those, that increase in revenue, our expenses, we are proposing to have expenses increase by $122,000 as compared to budget 2017. That includes programming for additional initiatives that will provide lasting improvements. That's certainly of interest to our sponsor, Meridian Credit Union. There are also costs, as the library board presentation showed. They are also facing an increase in facilities costs. So are we. Of course, we are the shared facility of both the library and the farmers market. That is of an increase in $27,000 of costs that are passed on to us from facilities management for the city. Increase in staffing of $17,000. That includes a full year of a marketing coordinator on staff. Previously, more marketing initiatives were taking place outside of our staffing envelope by consultants, but now we have moved that in-house through the efforts of a marketing coordinator. Common utilities are increasing, not surprising. Unit costs are increasing, and that's part of the story there. And we are also increasing our marketing expenditures by $10,000 in our proposal for budget 2018. We are also proposing a $3,000 contribution to a market reserve fund for future hydro meter recalibration. As I note later, we will be returning to you with seeking authorization for a reserve fund, and that is to smooth out the periodic nature of some of the expenditures that we have, including some of the capital in the realm of measuring hydro use. In all of this, I'll just reassure you that we are always mindful of cost effectiveness when we are looking at different approaches to achieve the same outcome. And as an economist, I'm very mindful of that. I'm also mindful that if we're choosing between different approaches to achieve slightly different outcomes, I'm mindful of benefits and costs and their relationship. This image is my attempt to, tell the story of the budget in numeric terms with a bit of a comparison between expenditure and revenue. This is what it looks like for budget 2018. Expenditures on the left, revenue on the right. And I've color-coded those so you can get a sense of comparisons. Vendor electricity is metered. We fully cost recover that. We pass on the cost at 100%, no additional markup though, onto the vendors, and that's why there's symmetry of those two items at the bottom. Beyond that, the net levy contribution from city covers the facilities management costs that are passed on to us from the city department. Otherwise, monthly rentals is a big source of our revenue. That supports staffing, customer parking, utilities, and so on. And as I mentioned before, the Meridian Credit Union is sponsoring the Hamilton Farmers Market in a multi-year sponsorship, and that provides us with additional revenue, with the balance being made up by some sales of merchandise and rentals of carts, which are short-term rentals which support some of the new up-and-coming businesses in Hamilton as they gain a foothold for their activities. We will be coming back to you in the future with a request to establish a reserve fund and policy for your consideration. That is something that is within our jurisdiction with the agreement that we have with City Council that was signed in the inception of our board. So it's within our power to request such a thing, and we will be doing that in short order. The purpose of this is to smooth out fluctuations year by year. As I mentioned, some of the expenditures that we incur are not on an annual basis, but let's say once every 5 years. And in order to budget for that appropriately so that we don't have huge spikes, let's say, in either variance or some other means of figuring that out, we'd like to establish a reserve fund so that way it'll sort of keep that on a more averaged basis. We are participating in the multi-year budget process. We agreed to voluntarily participate. I'll just say as As a treasurer, of course, it's a great initiative in any case, but all the better that it is being done formally in the city. When we did this, we forecasted our revenues and expenditures looking at sort of a business as usual approach, and then realized that business as usual is not good enough in order to stay within what we expect to be a reasonable minor levy increase over the coming years, assuming it's about 1% or so. And so then in our plan, we've made some adjustments accordingly so that we can continue to provide the market on a sustainable basis. I would just say that, of course, this is also very good because I'm a volunteer citizen member on the board. Even though I'm the first treasurer of this new form of the board, I am not going to be the last one, and so this also enables us to provide sort of a legacy, I guess, in terms of budgeting to the next board in a few years from now. And so we're grateful to have participated in it, and thank you for doing such a thing. Final notes. I look forward to seeing you and your staff and constituents at the Hamilton Farmers Market. We provide meeting agendas, minutes, attendance records, and other relevant information, including our budget submission. On our website, you'll find a link on our website through the Google Drive where we put all of our documents up there as part of our commitment to transparency. I would like to thank you for your support to date. As I mentioned, this is the 180th year of the Hamilton Farmers Market. It has gone through various forms of governance in that long time period, and I'm very appreciative that a few years ago, Council established a board to manage or to provide direction to the Hamilton Farmers Market, and I am pleased to be able to participate as a citizen member on the board, and I, and along with other members of the board, are very keen, and I'm very proud of the governance that we've been providing over the time of us as a board, and look forward to continuing that in the spirit of sustainability for the future hundreds of years, hopefully to come, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. If my math is right, it was established in 1832 or 1838? Okay, you figure it out.
Yep.
Councillor Farr has a question or a comment.
That's the first time I saw Eric kind of stumble on a math-related question. That's great, valuable board member, very smart guy, great presentation, Eric. I'm a proud member, along with Councillor Basuda, of the Farmers Market Subcommittee. Appreciating all the good work of our market manager, Bill, John Hertel, who still now and again attends these meetings and assists us, along with other staff who are valuable to the conversations that sometimes, Madam Chair, can go closing in on 6 hours, some of these monthly meetings. That said, that tells you we still have much to debate, to do, but we recognize that we're not wasting those efforts and any time in doing that. And this presentation, I think, clearly articulates we've turned a corner. We're meeting our council objectives with a 1.5 increase, and my guess is we'll be meeting most regular meeting timelines in short order with our new chair, Wilf, who is ill, unfortunately, today, but certainly our new chair is a very schooled committee member in past boards and agencies, and certainly knows how to move meetings along. So I look forward to that. Eric, you said a couple of things that I'm sure, the first thing I'll mention through you, Chair, the reserve fund, the multi-year budget forecasts. Actually, our GM of Finance was slouching at the time, and when you brought those two things up, he perked right up and started paying attention. It's right in line with the way we're kind of thinking as a city. And why do you think these two items are important as we go forward as a governance? Certainly something that never the farmers market looked at in the past.
Go ahead.
Certainly, so the two questions, one is about the reserve fund and one is about the multi-year budgeting. So in the reserve fund, as I mentioned, not all of our expenditures occur at the same rate every year. And so as a result, it's important to have a reserve fund so that we can smooth over that variability. So just one simple example, which is the example I noted in the presentation. We have within the market a software that determines how much each vendor used in electricity over the course of a time period. That enables us to bill them on a cost recovery basis because we don't have individual meters from Horizon for each of those. We just have one meter for Horizon. Every 5 years, that is required as a measuring device under standards and so on to go through a fairly thorough testing, recalibration process and so on. That costs an enormous amount, believe it or not, well, at least from my perspective. This is, I'm not an expert. So, for example, incurring an expenditure of $15,000 within 1 year for that and then zero in the next year, it would be quite a challenge to do from a budgetary perspective. And so that's the idea of a reserve fund, is that we're able to contribute the same amount, sort of take that cost, divide it more or less evenly, account for inflation and so on, and then that way that can be our contribution on each year so that in that year then we expend that money, we're expending reserve money and otherwise not affecting the sort of stabilization, let's say, of revenue and expenditures on a yearly basis.
That's the way it should be, and through you, Chair, I think that's a real good example. We actually polled all of our members on how we should utilize certain funds, and I think you and I were kind of champions of the reserve fund idea, and ultimately I think it's just prudent governance, and really the farmers market was never in the past in any kind of position to even dream of or contemplate such a fund. So it really does speak to how far we've moved the yardstick. So cost effectiveness when looking at different approaches to achieve the same outcome. You referenced that. That is pretty much your role on the board, and one that we truly appreciate. Would you say, through you, Chair, that it's also that angle and that approach that we take as a board of governance, that includes the stallholders, that includes the politicians and the community members, that should be a priority as we govern, and how that positively affects the presentation here today and future presentations? If you could just generally comment on that, through you, Chair.
Eric?
Sure. I guess I'll just say I like to practice what I preach, and what I preach in my daytime as an economist is what I practice here. I'm a fairly hands-on treasurer, as I'm sure the city staff will attest to. Now, it's, of course, really important because we are providing the City of Hamilton Farmers Market as a great service to the community. When we serve the community, we have to be mindful of the communities that we serve and so on. And that's why it's really important for us to take sort of a cost-effectiveness approach, because whereas in private enterprise, let's say there's other options available where one can pass on costs through the things that are being sold and so on, we do not do that, and that's not the way we approach things, because we're trying to serve the community and keep costs as low as possible. That's our approach. Because we are not a profit-maximizing corporation, we are one that, in terms of things that we're trying to achieve, we're trying to minimize costs in order to provide the service at the least cost. Some of the costs, of course, are passed on through vendors in the rents that we collect, but that's why I think it's really important to be of that mindset. And so that is our mindset. Now, one of the things going with that is that to do that well, we have to measure effectiveness, and that's one of the initiatives, or one of many initiatives that I've been pushing quite a bit as the treasurer, is to make sure that we are measuring much more of the outcomes than we have in the past. And I think that's one of the differences now, I think, in looking in the future, as you compare sort of governance now as compared to maybe in the past few years or so. I think is an increased emphasis on measuring the outcomes associated with that, and that's part of that calculation, which means we have to be measuring people by the hour, by the minute, and so on. We have to be measuring how the vendors are doing. We have to be measuring the type of people that come to the farmers market, where they come from, etc. And so that's what we're very mindful of.
Yep. Councillor Farr,
yep,
5-minute rule's up, so can you please wrap up or ask committee for an extension?
I'll move to extend.
Sure. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Just keeping with the discussion last night. Go ahead, Councillor Farr.
Through you to the clerk, my understanding from the discussion last night, what we approved, I don't know if you caught it, but I nowhere near 5 minutes on my questions, and I am permitted.
No, I agree.
Really? On the answers, I still...
Just go ahead.
Very good.
Keep
Through
going.
you, Chair. I'm done. I just actually wanted to thank Eric, and I wanted to display for all of you an example of just one board member whose enthusiasm and passion pays big dividends. We are we are a rolling stone in gathering no moss, and we are coming together with very good ideas on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, and we appreciate all the efforts of Eric. And I forgot to mention, Madam Chair, other staff. Rosanna Malata is invaluable to us, and working out of John Hertel's office, and of course Clerk Laurie is much appreciated, taking the minutes and helping us with governance throughout the process. Eric, thanks a lot. Always look forward to these presentations, and thank you for the extra time. I had no idea that the Q and the A doesn't matter.
Okay, folks,
Wow.
through the chair, thank you very much, Councillor Farr. I appreciate the respectfulness. Councillor Pasuda.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Eric, thank you for having the presentation. Been great if Wolf had been down here too. You'd have tag team just great. Mr. Finance and Mr. Keep It Straight and on the line. Wolf goes back to, was quite involved in agriculture back in his earlier days. He knows agriculture inside out. He's store manager, field man, everything, worked over in Linden at the co-op. He knows his stuff, and he's quite interested in farmers and farm markets moving forward. Bill Sloka, great to have him on board. He understands the food industry, where he's come from, marketing and sales. He gets it, and Eric, you got it, you get it. So it's been great. And Marissa was on as chair, and she stepped down, and Wilfred's come on board down there. So got a great team. Market's moving forward. From the beginning, when the market was redone, revamped, and to where it is now, there's been big changes. It looked like the market was failing at one time, and it was getting to cost a lot of money, but the board, people like Eric, Wilf, the rest of the board, Councillor Farr, this is right in the center of his ward down here. He's quite involved in it and interested in it. It's moving forward, it's good stuff. And there isn't too much I can say other than, I think it's not a big increase in the levy. The board, yourselves are doing everything we can to keep the dollars tight, bring in new vendors, and this place is kept full, so it's very good. And John Hertel, too, I'd like to thank him for his work on everything he's done. This farmers market, Hamilton Farmers Market, is a success. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Eric, good job. Thank you very much for coming today. And Welf, I hope you're feeling better. You need a motion, please, to receive the presentation. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Pasuda. All those in favour? Thank you. And I'm now going to turn the chair over to the Deputy Mayor for the police services.
Many thanks, Councillor Johnson, for filling in. Much appreciated. So, colleagues, we are now on the police budget. 5.3. Councillor Ferguson has requested to say a few words before the presentation. Therefore, Councillor, could you please click your microphone and I will turn on your apparatus.
Okay, thank you. And it's been tradition that the chair does introduce the presentation because it's actually the board that approved the budget. And from here it's moving on now, and the bulk of the presentation, in fact, the presentation will be done by our chief. Is that a remote? But before I start, I would like to recognize the board members that are here today. And you have Madeline Levig, who's a longtime board member, and recently, just last week, stepped down as vice chair, but still staying on as a board member for 2018. You have Stan Tick sitting beside her, who is a very well-respected lawyer who also sits on our board. We have our mayor, Fred Eisenberger, who sits on the board. We have Walt Justnewitz is here, who is a city appointee on the board. And we have Lois Morin, who is our board administrator. Just give a wave, Lois, so everybody hears about you, but they never see you. And so I'd like to welcome those members of the board. Unfortunately, our new vice chair, Don McVicker, could not attend due to business reasons. And I'm not sure where Councillor Whitehead is, but he's rounds out the 7-member board on the Hamilton Police Services. And the board did approve this back in December, and we're pleased to report that we're at a 2.45% increase. That is the lowest budget increase in 19 years. So it's quite an accomplishment. And knowing that Mike Zagarik's forecasting a 1% increase in levy, the actual impact on the levy will be obviously 1.45% with the growth of 1% with all the development growth that we've had in the city and the increase in assessment that's going to occur. It also includes not only the lowest budget in 19 years, but includes 9 new hires. Interesting concept, there's 6 of those new hires will be going into our forensic unit to do crime scene investigation. But the difference here is it's going to be civilian employees that will be doing the crime scene investigation, people who are trained through the school system how to do crime scene inspection and investigation. The chief can answer any more questions you have on that. But it's a switch away from the sworn officers doing that work to civilian people doing it. And those 6 officers who currently work in forensic are going to be shifted back to the front lines. And I know a lot of us are concerned about our pop-to-cop ratio, population to police officer, and this is going to put 6 more people back in front lines, which I think there seems to be, from members of council I've talked to, an interest in that. So the board's responded to that. In addition to that, there's 3 other sworn officers that the chief will touch on in his presentation. And the last thing I want to say, the largest capital project in the history of the service is ready to go. We've done the deal with Hamilton Community Energy. They're currently doing the piping because of this whole constructor issue. You can't have one contractor working on top of another. But Dan Bowen tells me we should be doing this odd turning ceremony sometime in the next 2 weeks. So it's a go. So at this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to our very capable chief, and Chief Girt, to do his presentation. So, Chief?
Chief Girt, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning. We're just doing a technical piece here to get the actual PowerPoint up and running. And if not, we'll go to backup plan. Sure. If you want, I'll open the other one if you like, Madam Clerk. There we go. Thank you. Oh, I see. Thank you very much. And as you know, this was at the board in December. It received the approval of the board, so this is bringing it forward to GIC and ultimately council when you meet and finalize total levy. So for the 2018 operating budget request, our focus, as you know, remains public safety and crime prevention. And if you look to the Act, crime prevention figures prominently. And I think you'll see later when I mention some of the changes in Bill 175, which are the amendments to the Police Services Act, you'll see that that is actually incorporated at a much broader level in the community. And we're obviously dedicated to preserving the peace by working with the community we serve. And of course, thanks to our community partners. I think you'll see when we move to some of the requirements in Bill 175, should it pass, Hamilton is well positioned because of the interagency work we already do in many facets. So the operating budget request, as mentioned by our board chair, is 2.45%. And I'm going to go over the policing context, kind of 5 major categories. Obviously, adequate and effective service as dictated by the Police Services Act. Case law and new law, and as recently as December, we've had a major change. So this is a continuing evolving situation. And obviously, when the Supreme Court says this is the way it'll be, this is the way it'll be, until such time the Supreme Court renders other directions to us. Obviously, changing demographics, not a new concept. Back to boom, bust, and echo when David Foote, as demographer, started to get us focused on these things so that you can predict them in advance. Mental health and addictions, and I've expanded out to both categories because some of the work we're doing around mental health, in my view, we're probably the most progressive in the country right now with the spectrum of services that we offer, not just ourselves, but obviously through Ministry of Health, the LHIN, other tie-ins to social services, but also as a comprehensive strategy within the policing services. And digital evidence, you may have heard, I've been calling it the digital tsunami or tidal wave. There's a conference coming up. I don't think they stole it, but they're using the same phraseology because on the horizon with the growth of the electronic age, it is a very vast wave coming at us. So we want to be prepared for that. So under Police Services Act 4.2, and it is the responsibility of the municipality to provide that. Crime prevention figures first, law enforcement, we all know what that's about. Assistance to victims of crime, that remains our focus. And when we look at how we do business, this is a key concept. Public order maintenance, and you've seen it with the demonstrations that happened in town. We have a dedicated group of individuals who monitor those demonstrations. Our view is to protect the constitutional rights that our citizens have to publicly demonstrate peacefully, and we facilitate that. And of course, emergency response. Relative to Bill 175, which are the changes to the Police Services Act, there's three major categories in here, although there's pages long. It has a ton of changes. But foremost in terms of what has been happening in the policing context, and actually the chair and I met this week, and our vice chair, former vice chair, with Justice Tulloch. He is now reviewing the COI legislation, which is the collection of information in certain circumstances, prohibitions and duties. But prior to that, he looked at the oversight agencies for policing, and specifically Special Investigations Unit, the OIPRD, which is the Ontario Independent Police Review Director. They can't make the title simple, I get it. And lastly, OCPC, the Ontario Commission on Policing. And we've seen them all in action. He is really, in my view, streamlining those agencies and what their mandates are. They have evolved over time. That is fundamentally incorporated in Bill 175. Suspension without pay, which we've advocated certainly through the previous chief and through Superintendent Goods Ritchie, who's here today. You can put your hand up, Nancy. Wrote the white paper that went forward to the OACP, and we continue to press on this. They have not come out with the regulations. So they normally write the statute. The regulations are the detail work. My fundamental issue with it is some of what has been posited as well. You should just suspend for indictable offenses. Things like, when you look them up in the criminal code, alarm Her Majesty, treason, commit terrorist acts. I think that's a no-brainer. We're looking for things like, and if you watch what's going on in the media, as recently as today, we're seeing, and I'm not casting judgment on what has happened, but we're seeing cases where there is sexual harassment in the workplace that does not rise to the level of sexual offenses under the criminal code. My view is the chief should be able to suspend if there's egregious repetitive conduct with multiple victims. That would fall under the PSA, Police Services Act, not the criminal code. So all those details are not yet in the legislation. We look forward to that, but we want to make sure that when we introduce suspension without pay, because it's about public confidence, when we have cases that languish for 5 or 6 years, people are ultimately found guilty, and they say, in one of the cases out of Toronto with an officer who killed his girlfriend and buried her in the wall, I'd like to be able to suspend without pay in those cases. That's another big piece. The last piece, and I have had discussions with the city manager, community safety and well-being plan. And this is in statute. It falls to the responsibility not of the police service, but of the municipality, and specifically council. And it is delineated who is on that committee. It involves the LHIN, Correctional Facilities for Youth, Aboriginal Services, Mental Health and Addiction Services, Community Services, and Social Services locally, and any other agency. We are represented on that committee through the board or designate, and their mandate is to look at crime, addictions, suicide, and other risk factors in the community. I think as a community we're fairly well positioned between the work we collaboratively do already. We've had wraparound as a philosophy, situation tables, hubs in the works for many years. Really we'll just have to create an inventory of that list, but it's more deliberate because really what we're looking at is resources either at the municipal level or at the provincial level largely dedicated towards reducing criminogenic factors at the outset. So that is in the legislation as well. It's at second reading. If it passes before the election, I don't know if that will happen or not, but I think it's probably not a bad idea in any event. And obviously the legalization and sale of marijuana, we continue to struggle with that in a variety of areas. Impaired driving is probably the predominant one where it's getting public attention. Exposure to youth. And in our most recent seizure at one of the dispensaries, it involves cookies with hashish in it and other drugs applied to things that would appeal to kids. That's a dangerous premise in my view. And certainly we've seen, both from the medical community and otherwise, around brain development up until 21, 22. I understand that's still a debate to come forward. As recently as yesterday, we now have some restrictions in terms of the Attorney General as to where and when you can consume. Will it be in a hotel, private residence, in a car? All those things, thank you. All those things are still being contemplated by the government, and there's public input on those, and we're obviously giving input through our agency, which is the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. Without looking at even opioids or the larger drug issue, safe injection sites. So there's a ton of issues going on with the drugs in our community. With regard to policing context for case law and new law, as recently as December 8th of last year, we had the America decision, which was a Supreme Court decision, and fundamentally it guarantees the privacy interests on digital devices. So very simply, if there's a domestic situation, theoretically I'm having with Madam Clerk here, I send her a text telling her I'm going to kill her. I cannot take that through Madam Clerk, who gives it to the police and says, this is wrong, here's the evidence. I have to go get judicial authorization to both get that evidence and search the device any further, because apparently I, as the subject of this investigation, am entitled to privacy rights with regard to my texting. That is a Supreme Court decision. We have to abide by those decisions. So that has increased the workload for us relative to digital seizures. And of course, it touches many investigations. In Regina versus Jordan, Justice Moldaver, who is the author of that Supreme Court decision, said we have to have decisions on cases, usually dual procedure offenses, 18 months, 30 months for more complex investigations like homicides. That is not a lot of time relative to defense counsel's motion to get additional disclosure, other delays that happen, but those are our timelines. The COI legislation, which I referenced earlier, was completed by January 1st, 2017. It required us to do a turnaround in about 2.5 months when the curriculum was established. Again, that was in statute, and they had a committee that sat to do that, but we met those timelines. And we're currently working, although it's been signed, on a memorandum of understanding with our Crown Attorney with regard to disclosure and vetting of digital evidence. So all that work is going on relative to the judicial scene. With regard to demographics, we have an aging population, no surprise there. Increase in First Nations youth. I don't know that everybody's attentive to that, but it's the largest growing population, certainly in Hamilton. Increasing diversity and newcomers. We see that whether it's Syrians, Somalians, or whoever may be on the horizon. And we have a strategy in place when newcomers arrive to educate them on expectations around both policing, domestic violence, misogyny, but also child abuse and other things where there are differences in terms of the law from countries of origin. But we do that in a graded fashion, gradual fashion. Fear of crime in older people. As you saw, and we had a notification just yesterday on the CRA scam, where you get the phone call, please text me this money or there's going to be a warrant outstanding, which we all know is not the case. However, for people who may or may not be familiar with it, they're intimidated by it and they certainly don't want to get arrested, and they may not know their finances. So our fundamental message is, if you have any doubt, make a phone call to CRA directly and hang up the phone, because CRA doesn't work that way and we certainly don't work that way. Language and cultural diversity required. What I'm talking about is our own capacity building within our service. So when we talk about diversity in our recruiting process, it's multifaceted. It's not just visible diversity. It's cultural diversity and linguistic diversity. We look for all three facets. And of course, our community wants to see themselves in how they are represented by the police service. So there are many ways that resonates. So we're certainly alive to that issue. And relative to our demographics, as you know, we were recognized as the second best in Canada for reflecting the diversity of the community we serve. Not Toronto, that's pretty diverse, but Hamilton is as well. Second in the country for mirroring through our service the community we serve. So we continue to focus on that. We are seeing increased calls for service, certainly with regard to mental health and addictions and the opioid crisis. Continued need for persons in crisis unit. This is the unit I referred to earlier. I'm not aware of any other police service that has the three parts to that, which is the social navigator, really low-end calls. Could just be a matter of getting somebody housing, getting somebody to a coat that they need, to an appointment. To our COAST program, now in our 20th year, certainly through no great foresight. It was built on the tragedy of Zachary Antidormi being stabbed to death by Lucia Piavazan, and the things that flowed out of that. So we're progressive in terms of where we went with it, but certainly built on tragedy. Last is our Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Team, which is an officer in uniform with a mental health worker responding to immediately life-threatening calls, either to the person themselves or to somebody else. So we were the first in Canada, best I know North America, to develop this. And now, of course, it's spreading like wildfire. We had a meeting with representatives both from Ministry of Health and the Attorney General just this week as other communities try to model themselves on that approach. And of course, this is all based on prevention, diversion, and integrated responses. If we don't have to pull people into the criminal justice system, we won't. If the disposition is better through other social service agencies, that's where we'd like them to go. It's better for the client, it's better for us, it's more cost effective. And it's really about harm reduction and decreased criminalization. So just looking at the MCERT results, again, Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Team. Before we started this project, we looked at benchmarks. Our front line was apprehending on the basis of life-threatening situations and bringing persons into, again, apprehending, not arresting, into the hospitals to be assessed by a psychiatrist at the rate of 75.4%. Because, of course, our people are not clinicians, nor are they mental health workers. When we began MCERT with funding from the LHIN to the tune of $500,000 through the work of Donna Cripps and many others, we have seen that decline to, for last year, 12.3%. So all those people who are not going to hospital, all those cruisers that are not lined up at St. Joe's, all the people who are not sitting in custody waiting to be assessed in a public environment, and all those potentially very dangerous situations being de-escalated and alternate service being provided. That, to me, is probably the leading issue. We looked at the coroner's inquests when we began this work, and the premise was we do not want another death with somebody with mental health issues. Can we guarantee that? We can't. But can we, to an alternate approach that leads to better treatment and less frequency? Definitely. We know that mental health affects 1 in 5. We've seen a groundswell of professionals talking about this. Probably my favorite is Clara Hughes, who suffers from anxiety and depression. And part of the philosophy used to be, well, you should just be able to will yourself out of it. Clara Hughes, 2-time Olympian. If anybody's ever ridden up Sydenham Road, I did it once. That was enough for me. She does it 5 times in her training. I think she has focus. I think she has discipline. I think she has those capacities. So her point is, I can't do this. I need help with mental health. This is a major shift in thinking. Really, in my view, we're on the cusp of it with addictions as well. There's a lot of blaming in addictions, but in many cases, there's physiological factors, genetic factors. We want to look at a better response for addictions as well. And of course, you've got homelessness, poverty, and mental health and addictions, all kind of as correlative factors. So again, our person in crisis unit, although it's kind of out in front, there's still a ton of work to do. There's more development to be done. As I say with the Community and Safety Wellbeing Plan, this will be an opportunity to start doing some of that work with our other partners. Back to our tidal wave of growth in digital evidence, it touches all investigations. And whether we're talking about homicides, domestics, frauds, thefts, assaults, all investigations. We have to gather that evidence, make sure it remains properly handled and that you can establish chain of command and continuity. More chain of continuity. And then it has to be tested. Most of us probably still have VCRs that blink 12 o'clock because you can, and that's the solution. For the court process, however, we have to establish when that item was created. I hadn't thought of that. It's good because it's irritating. But we have to make sure that all the way from start to finish that it's properly assessed, not tampered with. That has to do with storage and where we keep it, how it's accessed. There's a lot of work to do on that. And obviously the variety of sources. You have phones, computers, videos, it goes on. The variety of formats, I believe we talked to Ross on that. My understanding is about 62 so far. Including, because we have talked, and many of you met Michael Plaxton when you're looking on the tours of the ISD building, he still deals with beta. He, in fact, deals with 16 millimeter film sometimes, depending on the age and antiquity. Even beta, beta. Many of us wouldn't remember those, most of us do, I think. But all the new stuff that's coming too. So you have to be able to analyze that. And then, of course, evidentiary integrity, which I've mentioned in presentation in court. Are we ready to go with that other clip, Madam Clerk? Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. Yes?
Just for a minute.
I'm here to serve. If not, I'll do a verbal, but it's actually from our friends at CH and a small clip if you happen to see it at year end. But really what I was talking about was the requirements in court for presentation of evidence, and they did a nice job because they have very good equipment piecing it together quickly. It's not working at all. It's working up here. What about this one? No, okay. Well, there you go. You're back on that one.
As Chief Burt looks to past cases like the murder of Tim Bosma and Laura Babcock, he's also looking ahead to the future of gathering evidence.
Addressing the digital tsunami, the digital tidal wave.
Like tracking cell phones, text messages, searching through tablets, computers, and collecting surveillance footage.
Our investigators had to patch that through in a meaningful way that maintained evidentiary integrity to bring to the courts to say, here's what happened, the time sequence it happened in.
The police board has approved 9 new positions to focus on digital evidence, and later this month, the police chief will take that request to City Council.
Okay, what it showed you was, he said, adapting to circumstance. Really what it showed you was clips from the Bosma trial. I'm not insensitive to, obviously, the effect on Charlene and the family, but we know at that trial, digital evidence was critical, and obviously in the subsequent trial with Laura Babcock. So the seizure of the devices at the Waterloo hangar, events that happened in Mississauga and York, pictures of the Eliminator. I mean, I don't know about you, but it make my hair stand up on the back of my neck. I didn't even know they existed prior to these events. And when you look at the impact on a jury, getting that evidence out in a fashion that shows the sequential events, it has huge impact. And when we look at, again, victims, for Charlene and justice, this is pretty important. Our people take this very seriously. Literally, one of our forensics officers, just on her own, never mind OPP who worked with us, York, there were 5 jurisdictions involved, she seized 460 exhibits just on her own, not including all the other analytical work on computer towers, video systems. So, getting it right for the court process is extremely important because it really does support the victims in these crimes. That's all right. We know it's a new system. Oh, okay.
That's fine.
Do you want me to just continue? You've got the presentation in front of you?
Please do.
I will.
Please do.
So if you...
And sorry, Chief, Councillor Ferguson wishes to speak. Councillor?
Thank you. I want Chief, well, Stephanie's trying to get this going. I know we have some technical problems with that computer. I think it's important that it's up on the screen, you're speaking. Why don't you introduce your senior command?
Oh, sure, yeah.
today?
Great idea.
And your senior civilian employees, too, that are here today.
By all means.
Put face to a name for members of council.
There we go. We're back to that. Thank you very much.
And Chief, apologies for the technology. Our whole
it's okay.
system is a work in progress. We have
Understood.
new technology, so we're syncing everything, and it's
No problem.
imperfect.
So I brought
I'm
3
very
different
sorry.
sticks just in case. Didn't help, but okay. Ultimately did. Madam Clerk, thank you. So, and I'll introduce people. Dan Kinsella is our Deputy Chief of Community Policing. If you could stand up, Dan. Our Acting Deputy Chief of Field Support is Jamie Anderson. Our Superintendent of our Professional Development Division, which includes Risk Assessment, Professional Standards Bench Training, Superintendent Goods Ritchie. Dan Bowman, to her right, who's our Manager of Fleet and Facilities. And Ross Memolo, to his right, who is our Manager of IT, for want of a better term. There's other descriptions in that, but has a very full bailiwick. Jackie Penman, our Corporate Communicator. John Randazzo, to the deputy's right, our Head of Finance. And Ted Mason, their tag team. And they will, in fact, tag out if required. I'm sorry? And Ryan, yeah, I can't see him. And our Superintendent of Investigative Services, Ryan Diodati. Trying to see if I missed anybody. Is that everybody? Okay. And board members were introduced by you, were they not, Chair? Okay. Okay, I'm good. Okay. So cybercrime obviously affects all crime. I know they looked at it as a description for a specific kind of crime. It's not. And in fact, at recent conferences are saying, well, there's no really real way to itemize it because there's 2 things to it. Crime that happens through technology and crime that happens to technology. But it affects all investigations. And then crime-enabling tools, which you see in the nature of the offenses there. And of course, it's a global issue. So some of our major cases last year, just to bring you up to speed again, Project Lynx, a really egregious case, and we've seen some of the convictions come in and the sentences doled out. Child pornography case involved a variety of jurisdictions, including Homeland Security, because as you know, some of the contacts were done through the internet for the arranging of the abuse of this young girl. Really heinous crimes. And very important investigation. Has effects both on the community and also on our officers investigating. An arrest in the Michael Palmer homicide, which is 12 years old. Again, that came through assistance to the public. And we talk around the recent shootings, both last year and this is a pivotal piece for us. We know people who are either involved because they're targeted shootings, or people who saw things, them coming forward makes a difference in these cases. And obviously in the El Hasnawi homicide of Yosef, the arrest of those 2 parties in fairly quick order. That was the priority. There are other investigations going on relative to that, and time will show on those. Project Phoenix, 44 search warrants and 80 persons charged. You see the drugs that were seized, handguns, shotguns, cash, money, drugs, crime, all interrelated, as are the shootings. Crime rates, and you can see they're headed down. You can see the percentages there. Red being total crime, total property crime below that, and total violent crime. And then in our jurisdiction through UCR, which is Unified Crime Reporting Statistics, again, just a different representation. While there has been some increase in violent crime, obviously the shootings have something to do with that, as do predominantly street-level robberies. And again, you see it now. This is the crime severity index. So what's different is not just counting of the crimes, but assigning a weight to the type of crime. So if you have a shoplifting, they're going to weigh it with a certain percentage. If you have an aggravated assault or a murder, obviously it carries more weight. So this is a weighted system of looking at statistics, and this is for our jurisdiction. So slight increase in total CSI, the violent CSI, but downward trend over, in this case, 9 years, 10 years if you include 2016. You can see the way it's going. And again, crime severity index, again, violent crimes up 9.2%. Nonviolent crime is down. And again, this is where we are in violent crime severity relative to other major services within the country. And you can see the median in yellow, Hamilton in red, and of course some of the other jurisdictions and where they are. And of course, Halton being at the lowest, which is one of the safest communities in Canada. And Board Chair did mention our staffing increases, so we have provided a business case. The sexual assaults have increased both in reporting, and we've been deliberate about this. We have anonymous reporting, we have online anonymous reporting, but we're also promoting, as you know, the reporting of those crimes that can be properly investigated. And there's been an 83% increase through since 2008. And that means the ratio of cases to detective is 90.8 per year. That's a lot of cases to carry. And to spend the time both with the victims, the follow-up with victims, when they're prepared. We've been doing training on the neurobiology of trauma. And what happens is, as a result of that trauma, victims may or may not recall the events exactly right, kind of next day or immediately after. It takes some time. And we know that through the scientific evidence. So we go back to see the victims and get a full rendering. You see that in many of the cases going on right now. With regard to the digital evidence, and we did a study again to look at the metrics since 2012 on the time that we are spending gathering up that evidence. It can be a variety of things. It can be robberies. It can be, as I say, commercial institutions with video, taxi cabs, which this council has supported, the videos that you have to download, private residences. If we recall, with regard to the charges where a body was disposed down on 50 Road, that evidence flowed from a canvass done by our action officers to homes that were not yet occupied. But the officers saw cameras up and they said, well, maybe there's a camera running. They were, because there was potential thefts. What it captured was the disposal of this body by 3 persons. We saw the truck. This evidence can be pivotal to investigations. So you can see it's a 131% increase since 2012. I suspect it's going to increase. And then the calls for service. Projected, it is a risk in terms of investigations and the backlog. As you process these things, you want to have that evidence in a timely manner. So we've added 6 scenes of crime officers who are civilians, 6 special constables. And you can see in the arrow there just below it, for the most part, those officers will go back to the front line. There are still some of those calls that they will have to handle based on a crime in progress, based on other physical evidence, but predominantly for the gathering of digital evidence, they will do that. We also have to analyze that work a special constable, again a civilian, and a detective constable in that branch. Officers, and you've heard this one many, many times, cop-to-pop ratio. As you can see, the median is in light blue at 158 for the Canadian context. We are at 151.2, and then you see some of the other jurisdictions there as well. As stated by Councillor Whitehead at some of our board meetings, his comment was that we're punching above our weight class. We are a lean organization. I will quote the previous chief on that. Having been an officer in Toronto, when he came here, I think he found we had a very lean organization. So we continue to do that work in a busy environment. With regard to economic indicators, and we do pay attention to those, whether it's cranes and the downtown core or development, and we're seeing lots of that. We're certainly alive to the issue and continue to use our action officers in high crime areas where people have a perception that things may not be as safe, so they are present. It has moved up to an AA plus rating, above $1 billion for the building permits, and I know that Glenn Norton, currently in charge of that area, is quite proud of that, as he should be, and our unemployment rate. So we're trying to keep things through policing headed in the right direction. So the budget increase is the lowest in 19 years at 2.45%. The assessment growth, if you take that out, is 1%. If you take out assessment, then we're coming in at 1.45, and you see the dollar value for the total budget. Relative to the percentage of the levy, which I often get questions on, For 2017, we were 18.61. You can see that the levy over time is in red and the policing costs over time in blue. Lastly, on the multi-year rolling budget, and you can see this does not include staffing increases because, quite frankly, don't know who or what I'll need depending on the evolution of things. I have many, many ideas, as you might suspect, but what are the areas? Is it going to be fraud? Is it going to be human trafficking? Is it going to be more frontline? Are we going to go to more preventative services where we may be able to civilianize? Are there areas within the service that we can also civilianize? So we're certainly attentive to that. But you see in the bottom area, and I know this has a pointer or not, percentage increase over prior year, 2.45, 2.30, 1.88 for 2020 into 2021. But again, keeping in mind that does not include staffing. So now the recommendation is actually for GIC to approve the board's budget submission of 2.45%. Pending any questions, that is my presentation, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ferguson, you were on the list, and then I gave you the microphone for your earlier comments. Did you wish to make particular comments? You were first.
No, I just wanted to introduce the senior command.
Okay, that's fine. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Good morning, Chief, and good morning, everyone. When I was reading through your presentation and listening, I saw the opioid crisis. I saw all the... One of the things around this table that's been discussed heavily is the pot dispensaries and what that's going to look like. We sometimes forget about the growers as well, and we know very well, and Deputy Chief Dan Casella also can tell you that we have some really shady characters sometimes out there, especially in the rural areas. What is the anticipation from the police department on this brand new bill that's coming through that brings out another Pandora's box for the police service?
And sorry, just before I give the floor back to Chief Girt, Chief Girt, if I'm not mistaken, you're giving us a presentation about the pot laws coming up. Is that correct?
It was requested to be at GIC, which, as I understand it, and Superintendent Diodati was actually ready with a presentation today.
Right. So I wonder, and this is a question for Councillor Johnson, should we perhaps wait?
Thank you.
According to my script, we're having a whole...
If I can turn it to a budgeting question.
Of course. No, of course. I was going to leave it to you to decide.
What type of pressure are you looking at for your budget in the coming years on this new bill?
Yeah, and I can't state specifically, and the fundamental reason I can't is the federal government has not come out with the rules yet. Our view is it remains illegal. We are and have shut down a number of dispensaries. Many open up the next day because of the legal requirements. Because once we've executed the warrant and seized the goods, when we get judicial authority, that judicial authority is exhausted. So theoretically, you get a new manager, new supply, it opens up again.
Over.
It's very frustrating, and I understand it for the community and us. And Superintendent Diodati does have those statistics without doing, to the chair's point, a full presentation. But we're happy to answer that today. To your question, Councillor, it really is the feds coming out with it. I know that Minister Naqvi, at least in this province, has taken a position both on dispensaries. Will they privatize, which he's not recommending? And we're asking them for legislation that has teeth. Quite frankly, and we've heard from dispensaries who were shut down, and they had $400,000 seized in product. A couple of months or a couple of weeks, we'll be back, make that up, and you're kind of like, wow. So whether you're talking $1 million fines or $2 million fines, I think it has to be sufficient that it deters opening up a product again. The administration of it, in my view, should fall to the government, not to enforcement. Once they make the legislation clear, then of course we'll abide by that. But again, we're not chemists. If you're going to regulate it as a distribution thing, I would see that the feds do that. But I do know, and I've had many councillors approach me on this, it's a scourge, and predominantly because, and we've seen it in Toronto where they've done tremendous efforts, quite frankly, we're running out of storage room. And now we have to start getting costly alternate locations, with security, of course, because we don't want it being stolen, in an insecure building. And there's evidentiary requirements for court and all the rest. Our other frustrations is the position of the Crown on this. Currently they're proceeding, but should they make it not illegal, then I would hate to see all this work. It's not going to deter us. All this work, and people are just waiting the outcome Oh, I got a promise to appear. Oh, there's no sufficient fines. Cost of doing business from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's offensive. And we're in a bit of a quandary here till such time as the feds come out with the regs.
And thank you for that. And I don't want to take away from Ryan's presentation, so I was actually trying to hit the budget on this one because we look at all the crises that we've gone through over the past 10 years, and the police budget, reflects that. So do you anticipate your police budget in the next coming years to be substantially more because of this new bill coming through?
Yeah, and again, I don't mean to avoid it. I know that York Region, for example, and I supplied this information because it's all public, had done a study. It was quite comprehensive, not just medical marijuana, but legalization of marijuana, drug enforcement for driving, strike teams that will go out and do that work, and they costed it, I believe, at $5.7 million in 2018, 6.3, I believe, in the following year. The councillor has that information, but again, it's publicly available on the York. But they've done a lot of metrics to get there. We have incorporated relative to, and I know it doesn't answer your question, medical, but it's about people driving with the effects of marijuana. We've incorporated standard field sobriety testing. We've incorporated the expansion of our drug recognition experts. So once you're arrested out then you're brought to an expert for that assessment. We've included those costs in the upcoming budgets. So when you see the 4-year budget, we've included that. The part that's not there is what I don't know in terms of what the government will legislate. So there could, to your point, be additional costs. We have tried to factor in the knowns at this point. So when you see that 4-year projection, it's there. But quite frankly, I don't know.
Thank you, and I'm respecting the 5-minute rule, so I'd like to go back on the list, please. I still have some more questions.
Councillor, thank you very much. We'll go to Councillor Jackson, and please click your button.
Thanks, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So are we allowed then to ask questions of the budget that's been presented, or should I wait till the final part of the presentation? Okay. Chief, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Councillor.
And thanks for the team that you've established up on Division 3 now with Superintendent Will Mason and Inspector Paul Hamilton.
Glad to hear that.
I hope you'll allow them to stick around for a while pending advancement and promotions, and I get all that, but I hope that they'll be able to establish a good continuity up there at Division 3. Just a series of questions, Chief, since I don't have the luxury of the 3 of my colleagues to every month be familiar with the operation and what's happening. Status of the forensic building. What can you tell us, please?
And I will turn that over to Dan Bowman. He has been our lead on this, and I got to tell you, he's done tremendous work keeping this on track. As you might suspect, the board chair has a comprehensive understanding of building projects and holds his feet to the fire regularly, but his shoes are thick and he can take the heat. So over to you, Dan.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Dan, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The project actually kicks off next week with Hamilton Community Energy actually starting to pull their heating and cooling lines from their downtown core. They're starting the directional boring on the 29th of this month. They have access to the site for 15 business days, and the constructor then is planning to start his works on the 20th. So there's some logistical changing back and forth between the Ministry of Labor and who actually is control of the site. So the project is ready to go. We're anticipating right now probably a 19-month construction schedule, which I know the constructor is looking for some efficiencies on that. Obviously, the quicker they can complete, the better for them. So we've been working with some of the municipal offices to coordinate a groundbreaking ceremony. A lot of this information just came into place because we were able to finalize agreements with Hamilton Community Energy to move us forward.
Dan, thank you for that. 19 months. So when it's up and running, is the plan then, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to mothball the existing antiquated facility at Division 1, or what's the plan, Dan?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the plan is to refurbish a large portion of headquarters and to relieve the overcrowding that exists in the areas that will remain in that headquarters building. We also have staff moving out of the station or the Division 3 headquarters up on the mountain, so that will allow some of the overcrowding up there to be alleviated at the same time.
So it sounds like you're repurposing the antiquated current forensic building at Division 1. Is that accurate interpretation, Dan?
That's
Once
correct.
the new one's up and running, of course.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dan. Thanks for that update. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through to the Chief. Back to Division 3. As you know, Chief, it's your largest area of geographic land that your officers look after. And it's a yearly thing I often ask you in terms of, do we have enough officers up in Division 3, given the massive area geographically that they have to look after? And I'm always advocating for additional complements up there. Comment, Chief, what you feel?
I'm looking at the board chair. Yeah, I'd love to have extra officers up there. When we did a staffing study about 3 years ago, we actually looked at the minimum staffings for the mountain and increased it, largely based on the work created, I'll say, through the Meadowlands, whether through calls for service there, the population growth, but of course you've got growth in Elfrida, you've got growth up in Waterdown, the growth is everywhere. Yes, I could always use extra officers, but again, when you've got 4 squads, 3 divisions, if you were to parse out, let's say, that's 12, 48 officers, that's 4 per squad. Would that make a difference? Definitely. Is there a cost? Well, we know what the cost is.
So, Chief, I guess I understand that from my days on the board, obviously you target the highest area of crime, if my memory serves me right, your priority system of response. And so I always worry, and not to diminish serious crime, and if it's saturated in a certain area, but I always worry that other parts of the city, like the mountain, quality of life issues become secondary and don't get the number of officers for responses that are necessary. Comment, please.
It's a tension in all 3 divisions. We're certainly alive to it, both for efficiencies that we might try to make through all the years to increase time for proactive policing. And largely that deals with quality of life issues. And to your point, you can be investigating homicides and aggravated assaults, and I've talked about this very publicly. The leading issue when I go to public safety forums, and I have for years, is traffic, because that is what people see in their neighborhood. So when we look at traffic enforcement, and we put proposals forward in terms of dedicated officers to traffic enforcement, quite frankly, that in my view would certainly assist with looking after both councillors' complaints, but councillors reflect what the population is telling them. And I know whether it's our beat crime managers or having worked at division, it's the leading issue. And that can be speeding, now distracted driving. It's going to be drug-impaired driving, where it's not alcohol. Weights on vehicles, the list goes on and on. When I do the call-in show on Bill Kelly as a town hall, and it was very interesting, just 2 weeks ago, Rick Samprin was filling in for Bill Kelly, and we're receiving calls, and we said, upcoming will be the 41 shootings in Hamilton last year. They did about 3 lead-ins, and the first call we got was a gentleman talking about people driving out their rear taillights while using their daylight driving lights. Next up was people driving with 1 headlight. I often get electric scooter questions, pedestrian crossovers, and I don't mean to minimize it because it is important. If you look at, and as a former traffic officer, our deaths from fatalities and collisions usually exceeds our homicide rate. These are still people and families affected by this. It continues to be a pressing issue in the public's mind. Now it's distracted driving. The OPP is talking about transport trucks and their involvement in collisions. We keep tabs on all those things. We continue to have Klaus Wagner talking about traffic safety as a regular feature. Whether it's distracted driving, we're seeing the conversions of streets. So to your point, I would love to bring, and I have to do it through the board, a project forward that looks at specifically traffic in all 3 divisions.
Terrific, Chief. Mr. Deputy Mayor, do I graciously ask for an extension for the continuity of my questions? I got 2 or 3 left, or I'll go on the second time list.
Then clearly the will of the group, which is completely appropriate, is to give Councillor Jackson continued time for his excellent questions. Please continue.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. 2 or 3 more questions. So that segued, Chief, DSOs then. Do you have a sufficient number of DSOs, and specifically in Division 3, or is that part and parcel of what the crime manager does, or do you specifically have DSOs specifically targeted to looking after traffic matters, truck routes, speeding, things like that?
Yeah, and quite frankly, we could always use more. I'll give you the analogy for me. When we're doing a study in the East End, and the leading complaint was stop sign intersections. So one of our crime managers said, well, I wonder how many we have. And I believe it's up around the 2,200 mark just for the East End. That doesn't include speeding. That doesn't include distracted driving, the link, the Red Hill Expressway, all those other areas. Quite frankly, I could use more divisional safety officers. As you know, they're dedicated to doing traffic accidents, the investigation, because they have specialized skills, but also the enforcement piece. We have supplemented that both with our support services, specifically around the link in Red Hill, but we also have tasked our officers, and I am visiting parades as recently as last week. I'll be doing it all month. Traffic safety remains important, as does enforcement. So when you have that extra 10 minutes, if you do, and chances are you'll see an offense, then we expect enforcement on that.
Chief, I would humbly leave with you and the chair and Mayor Eisenberger and Councillor Whitehead moving forward. I've always tried to be very supportive of board budgets, past and current, and obviously this is a very prudent one. I congratulate you and the board. I would humbly suggest, especially for the acceptance of the taxpayers and the community, if you, and I'll reaffirm with my office and what you just said about traffic literally and quality of life issues being the #1 complaint I've had, I'll say for the last 4 or 5 years, it's been top in terms of needing police visibility. Chief, I would humbly suggest to take under advisement, if you need to increase your budget even more so in future years, but you can earmark and show to at least myself, I won't speak for my colleagues, but on behalf of the constituents I represent, that if you got that bump up in the budget, and that was earmarked towards 4 more DSOs, Divisional Safety Officers, that are specifically putting 100% of their time towards traffic safety, traffic calming in our neighborhoods and communities, I could sell that easily, I believe, at town hall meetings. But I don't know if you have either the flexibility or ability to do that if you ask for an increase, that you could say, Councillor, give me that extra amount of dollars, and I promise you I'll hire 4 more DSOs. Comment, Chief?
Quite frankly, I have a plan in my office that does exactly that.
Okay.
As you know, there was a proposal put forward both in the Link and Red Hill last year, and it was declined, specifically around that area. I've grown that plan since that time through the work, and he's not here, Superintendent Will Mason. It's fundamentally ready to go. It has looked at the analytics. Okay. It has looked at the distribution of accidents in all 3 divisions. And, and again, I used to be in traffic. That's what we did. But we did a much broader range of skills. We did ride lanes. We did traffic control. We did hosting events where you used to have the Geritol Follies, for example. Yes. Where you have older pedestrians arriving at either the convention center or in this case Hamilton Place, making sure they got there safely. All rolled into the duties. That was looked at, as you know, when Chief Madoff first came in and traffic was decentralized. My view is if there's an appetite among council to do that and do specifically traffic enforcement, I'm more than happy to bring that to the board.
Terrific, Chief. Well, count me in for that conversation. Mr. Deputy Mayor, thanks for your indulgence. One more question. Chief, quickly, please, back to slide 17, please, if you could.
If I can do it here?
Just go back there, and I just, something that's just a little bit perfect. So the yellow bar. So, Chief, the violent crime increase there. By the way, thank you for the mounted unit. Keep it going. I'm a huge fan of it, as you know, and get that mounted unit around to park events, things like that. It's a hit, and it's a way of promoting policing in our community. So, well done with keeping the mounted unit. That yellow bar is bothering me, Chief. It's a little bit disturbing to me. Overall, is it drug-related? Is it targeted mostly? Is it random? There's some peace of mind I need to express and share with my community in terms of what exactly that yellow bar indicates. Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you, and that's my last question.
Thank you. And as you know, our lead on this has been Superintendent Diodati, and I will turn it over to Superintendent Diodati to answer that specific question.
Please. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Councillor, thank you very much. First time, Councillor Marula.
No, whoa. Mr. Deputy Mayor, Superintendent Diodati wanted to answer my question.
Forgive me, I didn't see the indication. Superintendent, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, yeah.
I think you...
Just to clarify, to the best of my knowledge, there is no button here for me to activate the staff microphone. They click.
Oh, it's on now.
Okay.
So just to clarify a myth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Stephanie, and Superintendent. Welcome, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We have seen a rise in our shootings over the last few years. In 2017, we had 41 shootings, and this year so far in 2018, we've had 2 shootings, most recently 2 nights ago. Most, if not all, of these shootings have been targeted victims. And I've said it in the past, I can tell you that the drug subculture is an underlying theme in these shootings. We continue to investigate them. As recently as last night, our Guns and Gangs unit executed a warrant and took two firearms off the street, one of which was a .45 caliber loaded firearm in the residence. So we do have a dedicated unit. We continue to work with our divisional detectives in combating these crimes. Investigative Services Division doesn't always investigate these. In some cases, it's the individual divisional detective's office that do, in fact, investigate these shootings. And we continue to come back, have roundtables in terms of intelligence gathering, and then in terms of projects. And I can't speak to ongoing projects, obviously, but I will speak to Project Phoenix, which has already been mentioned by the chief, where we did concentrate on illicit drugs and firearms. And in that case, we took 7 guns off the street. It was about a month-long project. We laid 70 firearm offense, criminal code offense charges for that project. So we do continue to work with our law enforcement partners, both our municipal services, our provincial services, federally and internationally, along with the CBSA as well, because we do know that a number of our firearms do come from the U.S. Through the various borders, obviously illegal. The other way people are getting their hands on guns are through break-and-enters. They're stealing guns from lawful gun owners, often altering the firearms or filing off serial numbers, making it more difficult for us to trace the firearms. But again, we work very closely with our other law enforcement partners.
Superintendent Diodati, an excellent answer. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just feel, Chief, that overall I truly believe our community as a mid-sized city is safe overall. Obviously, could always be safer, and I just want to provide that peace of mind in the community that it seems like most of the violent crime happening is targeted, possibly drug-related. I know there was criminal activity there on one of my East Mountain streets in the community, and your officers, I think it was within less than 2-3 weeks, had arrested 3 individuals and charged them, which was excellent work. Mr. Deputy Mayor, thanks so much for the extension and your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I might just add one comment, Deputy Mayor. If you look at the Papalia shooting, the Mustano shooting, and the connection to York, you can see with the release of information that we're now doing that we're cross-jurisdictional. And there has been a link. The Detective Sergeant has come out with that, as has York. Relative to the prevalence of guns and your comment, I certainly listen. When I watch the news and the people in the neighborhood interviewed, I'm thankful that they say, this is a fairly quiet neighborhood, I'm surprised it would happen. Oftentimes what we're having is 2 agreed parties getting into it in the middle of that particular neighborhood just because that's where they happen to be or meet. It's not a great thing. I certainly get that, certainly from stray rounds and otherwise. But to your point about the general feeling of community safety, I'd agree with that. Where we get to a point where the community is saying this is happening every night, that's a different discussion. But again, we look for the common threads. We look for common personalities. It's not just the units investigating. It's our break-and-enters. It's our drug branch. It's organized crime. It's our gangs and weapons unit, our biker enforcement unit. They're all looking at this. This is a large, I don't have it up, but you know, that 9%, that's a big deal. So we're certainly focused on it. But you have to be strategic in the deployment. So relative to your point, guns, money, drugs, that's where we continue to focus, as opposed to arbitrarily sending, special task force. Not sure where we would dispatch them because we're seeing it in a number of areas. The last piece is, with the 400 series highways and with the growth in the large urban areas, being Toronto and the GTA, they're traveling down here. If there's money to be made in drugs, they're traveling. It's worth the drive. They can pay for their transponder. And I don't mean that facetiously, from the profits of drug running. But that's what we're seeing as well, is we're having residents of other cities getting involved in these gun battles in our communities, which none of us want. So that's why we extend out to the other jurisdictions to work with them on potential targets or suspects. And as I say, in the most recent, and this was a homicide through guns, in the Mustano shooting. Thank you.
Excellent questions and well said. First time, Councillor Marula.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and welcome, Chief. And just on a couple of fronts, one thing that I noticed is you mentioned and applauded personal residences that have video cameras.
Yes.
And what I find interesting is that if that camera, based on a bylaw that exists, faces the street, it's actually illegal, and a resident can actually be charged and fined accordingly. I'd like to look at a means of reconciling that. So I'm going to be formally presenting a motion accordingly to have our staff work with your department to see if perhaps, if it doesn't in any way impede on privacy, meaning someone's backyard or so on, but it's in the front of the home, that it be permitted to not only help the resident, but also, more importantly, to help you in your policing efforts. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what would you feel about such an endeavor?
I do think it's a good idea because we know the impact of cameras on a broader scale. It is a Privacy Commission issue. And as you know, when we implemented, largely through the work of Deputy Chief Leendertz at the time and Superintendent Shea, they met with the Privacy Commission when we were distributing CCTV cameras. So the Privacy Commission has been pretty firm on the right to privacy in homes. For example, I've had it suggested around drones, but when we dispatch drones, now you have a device over top of people's backyards with an 8 or 10 foot fence. I can't remember the bylaws. I don't think you can have a 10 foot.
6'6".
6, okay. But there's still an expectation of privacy, so if we're driving around with our drones, they're saying, well, why are you doing that, and what are you collecting the information for? So I think the friction point is really with the Privacy Commission. It's not so much, we would be in support, because as I've said with my whole digital tidal wave, and unfortunately we didn't get to see footage from Bosma, but this is compelling evidence, and when you see it from a street position, and it's largely a wide scope, you get a better sense of what happened there. So I would support it. I just think the rub is, so to speak, the Privacy Commission.
Now, which begs the question, through you, Mr. Chairman, is why would there be a privacy issue with respect to the front of your home? I can understand backyards, but the actual sidewalk in front of one's home, what privacy are we protecting when someone's just randomly walking up and down the street?
Yeah, and you're talking about it being pointed at the house or out from the house to the street?
From the house to the street.
I don't know the specific privacy ruling, but my sense would be, given that there's some public land which the city owns and there's private land which is not owned, there's an expectation if the field of vision enters into those private areas on the adjoining lots, could be a side window, could be a front window, I don't know, depending on how it's set. I don't know the specific privacy.
That's why I think we need to evaluate, because I think my understanding is, through you, Mr. Chairman, that even if it's targeted to the sidewalk, it contravenes the bylaw.
Okay.
So I think that's where we need to elaborate. So at the appropriate time, I will move that motion. But I think it's important that we basically see eye to eye on that particular bylaw, because I know a lot of residents are concerned about breaching that bylaw, being held accountable. But we'll work on a motion accordingly, and hopefully we can find common ground, because I think it's an important initiative. Secondly, policing over the years has truly morphed into more than just enforcement. It truly does represent social work, education, public health, the fentanyl issue being one of the most contentious ones most recently,
right?
In not having your officers deal with that. But having said all of that, in policing you have a sworn officer who then ultimately internally works their way through an application process to become, for instance, a victim crisis worker, and or the education component, the public health component, rather than having civilians pursue those endeavors. I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Chairman, wouldn't it be advantageous, being that police predominantly should be an enforcement entity, that those other components that have, I think, grown in more of a, I'm not sure if it's a burden, but more of a focus lately, be directed more towards civilian type of positions as opposed to police?
Yep, and I do have a copy of the Act with me. Bill 175 contemplates that, and they contemplate actually that council will have the ability to review our distribution in certain areas. Now, again, it's not passed yet, but they're looking at forensics, they're looking at surveillance, Part 6 investigations with wiretaps, bomb disposal. That one throws me off a bit, but I guess if you have a specialized capacity in bomb disposal, fine. And there's a whole list of areas in that act. I mean, I can get it, but you get the general sense.
Right.
Relative to even the budget this year, that is why I've looked at, can we specialize when you're looking at somebody with the technology? Can we get somebody who can handle that digital piece of evidence, quite frankly, at lower cost with the skill set that doesn't have all this other stuff and all the other duties? So I think you're seeing a progress from a larger landscape in the changes to the Act. We're trying to embrace those, and where we can, and you see it, I have, of those 9 positions, 7 are civilian, 6 special constables out in the field, a special constable specifically in the tech crime branch. But again, when they arrive with those skill sets, whatever college or university, they know how to manipulate that data and make it work, and but they're not doing all the other jobs, as you said. So I think you'll see the splitting off of those specialized areas through the course of time, and we're moving in that direction.
And to you, Mr. Chairman, what is the percentage of your operating budget that represents personnel or human resources?
It's approximately 90%. I turn to John's nodding. It's gone up from about 88 to 90% is benefits and wages. And that's both civilian and sworn, which leaves, let's say for the sake of argument, a $150 million budget. I have $15 million to pay for, not to make the point, but buildings, cars, gas, hydro, repairs, software, IT development per year on all the equipment. If we increase the size, all the stuff you have to equip an officer with, all the things that have to be upfitted in a vehicle, all that stuff with 15 mil.
And that's, through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this came up as one of the downloading issues, the fact that council's inability to have direct versus indirect control of operating budgets. The City of Hamilton's operating budget, our HR, meaning, I guess, salaries and benefits, is only 50% of the operating budget, which is quite significant in difference. And when you look at our fire services, they're in and around 90% as well. So the one consistent aspect to that is that anything that has to do with provincial arbitrary or through an arbitrary process seems to have higher types of impact from a salary and benefits perspective, and the consistency there is the province. So when you look at the fact that we can't control it and someone can go to arbitration, that's what's truly driving the cost of wages and benefits. So through you, Mr. Chairman, if we can perhaps look at the civilian component and how that might be able to mitigate some of the salaries and benefits, I think it would go a long way in mitigating the impact on our residents. So through you, Mr. Chairman, if you could, do we have an understanding of what percentage of, in your analysis from the bill you referenced, would actually decrease the actual salaries and benefits category? Has that been studied or assessed in any way?
It's been assessed a number of times, and that's back to the Neighborhood Safety Project. When we looked at the redistribution of tasks, one of the examples is our Crime Analytics Unit. That was originally done by sworn officers. Through the course of time, we've refashioned that. It's largely, again, civilians who make the statistics and all the things work. So we have done workload studies. We've looked at core responsibilities. This is being looked at many levels. OMBI and AMO is looking at it. OAPSB is looking at it. We're looking at it. Through the OHCP and to the ministry, our oversight ministry, MCSCS, they struck a future policing advisory committee about 5 years ago looking at exactly these things, which is kind of to my point, when the act was changed, they made it mandatory that you would look at civilianization in specific areas. So I think people are alive to the issue. Let's look at the suggestion from Councillor Jackson, who's talking about traffic enforcement. And there's been some contemplation, well, let's not equip them with use of force options, well, let's just go out and do traffic enforcement. Your problem is the person you're stopping a parolee with drugs and guns in the car. So when you do that traffic stop, if you've got somebody who's unarmed, you could be in some a very interesting interchange there. So it's the potential of a roadside stop. When I was in traffic for years, you never know what it's going to turn into. Now that's one area. But for more specific areas, yeah, we're looking at and continue to look at potential civilianization. I think your point is well made.
Okay. So I guess through you, Mr. Chairman, then you would concur that there is a focus presently to try to mitigate and decrease that 90 percentile any way you can. Okay.
Great.
And I appreciate your time, and thanks very much for your efforts regarding the dispensaries as well. And as Councillor Johnson mentioned, you did provide me, and I did reference last night, the numbers from York when I brought forward the motion. So formally, through you, Mr. Chairman, you would concur with those numbers on a per capita basis, I presume, for Hamilton as well?
I don't know, because here's my trepidation. Certain assumptions they made, quite frankly, if I were to tell you it's going to cost you $6 million next year, they don't come up with the legislation that requires that. And then it's $2 million, you say, oh, you're fear-mongering, $4 million over, you're just petting. I did not want to get into that dynamic. Largely because, as Councillor Johns asked the question earlier, I don't know what the feds are going to do, so I don't want to make assumptions to be incorrect and be viewed as doing that.
Would it be fair to say that they probably deduced the worst case scenario?
That would be fair. It's very comprehensive.
Okay. All right. And I appreciate your time. And lastly, the clerk mentioned that my motion would be more appropriately put forward at regular GIC, so I'll do that accordingly regarding the video cameras.
Thank you.
So I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good impersonation of those who accuse you of fear-mongering. Our next speaker is Councillor Partridge, first time.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and welcome, Chief, and everyone up there. Good to see you, and thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. The first one is body cameras, and I apologize if I missed any part of the presentation where you talked about that, but where are we with that? Because I know we talked a lot about it last year and the year before.
Yeah, so we've done now 3 reports to the board. We have done an academic research of the literature, largely in Britain, the UK, and the States. In a nutshell, what we're finding is the original reason to implement cameras, which is a decrease in public complaints, which is a reduced interaction for use of force with members of the public. The evidence is not being borne out on that. Relative to, and having witnessed, for example, video footage taken from the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida. And they must have had about 35, that I'm aware of, body cameras. We were watching the presentation. I mean, I'm not trying to overdo it, but you had to kind of turn your head sideways to get the perspective because the camera was situated sideways. You're going into a nightclub with flashing lights. It's a dark environment. When you look at the impact, it can be very confusing. Some of the external cameras, they had stuff mounted on helicopters and all kinds of things, were better footage, but quite frankly, with how it's aimed, its field of vision, we have concerns about cameras that exceed human perception. So if you're to put a camera that does that, now you play it in court and you say, well, clearly the officer could see that. Perhaps not, because the resolution exceeds human capability, and the officer may not see that. From a fundamental perspective, my camera is directed this way, but I'm looking this way. The camera's not looking what I'm looking at. It's still very important, and I think in our court system or our complaint system, you have to hear from the people involved. And when you're talking about interactions, the use of force or complaints, body language, tone, what was said, how it was said, what were the actual interactions, what were the perceptions of the people who received that communication, they all blend into it. And I think really, when you look at the court system, because it's tested through, evidence in chief, cross-examination, re-examination. I think it's a cumbersome system in many ways, but it's robust.
And it's interesting that you should say that because, certainly at the time there was lots of discussion, and I think the perception of the general public is that it would just create another positive in their minds, perhaps, evidence base of what actually happened. But you're very right. The camera is not attached to any device that's attached to the head or the eye. So when an officer is looking in a certain direction, the camera could be pointed in the other. So I do appreciate those comments. I also appreciate a previous speaker bringing up the security cameras on houses. That is in direct contravention with our bylaw. So I'd be very pleased to second that motion whenever you want to bring it forward, because I hear that from my residents. And Waterdown, as you know, is one of the fastest growing communities, as well as Mount Hope, Binbrook, and Elfrida. And traffic is number one. There's no question traffic is number one. But along with that growth comes, parking on the streets and break-ins. And so I know for my residents, they have been able to provide a great deal of footage from security cameras on their homes and neighboring homes. I think the sooner we can bring that motion forward to address that issue, the better, because in many cases, the cameras are pointing out at the street, and they are capturing more than just the individuals that are breaking into cars. And I also wanted to just touch on Division 4. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard any conversation about that. Again, if I missed it, I apologize. But what are your thoughts on the Division 4? I'm very supportive of it. You've talked to the suburban councillors and rural councillors about it. Where are we with that? Is it still 5 years away?
I would think it's probably longer given the span of time that it takes to develop infrastructure projects without sounding facetious. But when it was raised here, I believe some people said it was the first time they'd heard of it. We presented on that, I believe, since 2014 or 15, John? 14.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
So we put that in as a placeholder. Quite frankly, will it be in Elfrida? Will it be in Binbrook? Will it be in Waterdown? I think when they constructed Division 3 on Rymel Road, the intent was to look at possible serving of that end. I don't know if that'll be done properly or not. What I do know is that we'll have to do a workload study. We have to do staffing issues there. It's not just the building. Is it redistribution of officers? Is it an increase of officers? That work, quite frankly, would probably take about 10 years to completion should it get approved. So we did it as a place marker to say there will be a need in the future. Quite frankly, the discussion was, well, you just got an ISD building. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. I've been at the economic conference for Hamilton specifically because I wanted to know, not just from our perspective, but from the city's perspective, where the growth will be, population, what are the businesses that are coming in, that broader spectrum about development. And we do know, Elfrida, as I understand, is number 2 on the economic development list for the city.
Absolutely. And to your point about having raised it in 2014, I know certainly, I had the conversation with the previous chief and with staff and previous superintendents as well, back in at least 2014, 2015, about the growth that was coming and how critical it was that police services connect with planning staff to really understand what the growth was going to be across the entire city. So thank you for your comments on that. And of course, in 5 years' time, a lot of the growth that is planned is going to be realized. Mm-hmm. The building is fast and furious. It's just amazing to me how fast it's going. So, I just encourage those conversations to continue.
And just to build on your point, Councillor, if I might, I know when we went to the public meeting in Waterdown, your point was the growth of the infrastructure, the highways, which leads to traffic, right, which leads to complaints, which leads to potential risk to residents. Suddenly it's there, and I think your point was you had petitioned that through the various oversight agencies to say it's coming. Relative to Station 4, it's not just the building, it's all those other requirements, mm-hmm, infrastructure. If it ends up a bedroom community, it might be a little different in terms of demands for service,
right,
versus a downtown core.
And I'm not advocating for a station for Waterdown, because I agree with you. I think we need to look at the broader urban-rural area, throughout all of Flamborough and Glanbrook and Upper Stony Creek. And we do have a Division 3 there, but, is that a good location? How does that enter into the mix? So, I don't think having a location in any one specific community is necessarily going to be better for to serve the broader geographic areas, because it's massive out there, as Councillor Jackson said. My community meeting, thank you very much, several months ago, well attended. I think there was almost 200 people in attendance, which typically happens out in Flamborough area. And I appreciate the people that attended. Now, we had fire attending, we had paramedics attending, and we had police attending. It was a thorough discussion and meeting. I don't think there was a question that the residents asked that wasn't answered appropriately, and they were very, very pleased. So I want to just extend the kudos and my gratification to all the chiefs for the work that went on. And very lastly, Chair, just a very quick comment about the Mositano situation. You were quite correct. It is a very, very quiet community where that tragedy happened, so much so that for the years that family had been there, none of the neighbors knew anything about their background. And yet, they knew them. There was barbecues and that kind of thing. I was very grateful to the police in their interaction with me, that I was able to attend out in the community when it happened and speak to all the residents on the street. They still feel their community is incredibly safe. It's a very, very nice neighborhood. So I want to thank you and the other police staff for the sensitivities shown in their interactions with my residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the excellent comments. First-time speaker, Councillor Conley.
Thank you. I think we all can agree that traffic is number one. I think we all can agree. A lot of my calls are because. The second thing is B&Es, especially not especially, but particularly in my area. And a lot of it is because a lot of the houses back onto parks and everything, so it's a nice, easy way to get into the community without being seen. And a lot of people just don't think we're doing our job, and I'm not suggesting you're not.
Understood.
But lots of times, if the complaint could be, if an officer could go to the door, talk to the guys, give them assurance we're doing it, and they might be, but I haven't heard a lot of that. They just say, do a report, or down at the office. And I think the personal touch with people would help a lot. And the other thing I hear is, we never see any police patrol in my area. And I know that's not true, but I know a lot of it is done in the evening when people aren't out, or at night, because most of the time it's quieter, and they have time to do that. But the more exposure we can get with the public, driving around the roads and seeing that, the better. And I'm not suggesting, I think we do a great job, to tell you the truth. But just some suggestions that I'm getting on a regular basis. So take it for what it's worth. I don't think there's an answer required. But
just to your point, Councillor, and you're in the money here, when we look at this quadrant on the bottom, scenes of crime special constables, we went to a system back in 2006 with mobile response unit, specifically for break-and-enters. And the idea there was, with the priority response system, somebody would call in a B&E, but there's no suspects at the scene, but you have a disturbed house, sometimes with damage and all the rest. The resident thought, I can't even move within my house. They call the police. Then, due to priority response, you had a domestic or an accident or whatever, they didn't respond. So we set up a system, a mobile response unit, that they would make appointments with those victims. Say, okay, you know, this part leave alone, this part you're free to make your supper or whatever. Just that alone, okay, I can kind of get on with my life. Because we know from the research, B&Es are extremely disturbing, particularly to women, because it's so invasive into your private space, and then depending on what the offender does as well, either damage goods or throw your stuff around or whatever they do, and some it's not very nice, it has a huge impact. So really when we're talking about these scenes of crime special constables, they weren't able to spend that amount of time again because of all the digital stuff they were gathering. So really the deputy, Dan Kinsella, said, how do we address this? And you see the time on calls here going 131%. So we used accommodating officers in the position to go and do that work to help out, which it did, but we needed more. So that's why, in fact, the bulk of the people we're dedicating in the staffing is to address exactly your point. Can we have people go out to manage, largely B&Es is what they deal with, and get that stuff, set their minds at ease, talk about whether it's crime prevention or target hardening, all those other things, kind of the softer things, but we still want somebody to look at the MOs. Is it just outbuildings? Are they going through the side? Are they looking for firearms, looking for quick disposal, all that stuff. And then to your point about service, and it's certainly Councillor Jackson mentioned it, it's a quality of life issue. How you respond to that call can be more important for the homeowner than potentially an arrest, because I've seen it. And they go, oh, that's nice, but they'll never get anything. But could you reestablish order for them? Can you make it better in terms of victimization? So certainly in this budget, that's what we focused on. And we're trying to free up the time for those officers. Like I say, the 6 officers back to patrol. This is really proof of concept, and I'll have to take it through my board, but I would like to see it expanded again. We have 12 MRUs, Mobile Response Unit. I came in at 6. You know, there's a possibility for 12. Now I'm hearing traffic units, but no, I won't be coming with 60 people next year. Get that. It has to be responsible and targeted to the workload.
And the 6 people they're not officers, they're civilians.
Oh, the 6 scenes of crime are special constables, so they're not officers. But that frees up those 6 police officers to go back to do frontline duties.
Just explain. Special constables, what does that mean?
Yeah, so
they are policemen?
They are not.
Oh.
They have certain authorities under the Act. They do not carry firearms, and they have certain duties with respect to arrest, but not the full duties of a police officer. So we don't generally dispatch them. For example, our court branch is largely run by special constables. People are in custody. You don't need a firearm down there. There are police officers who oversee it. Back to Councillor Marula's earlier point, we have civilianized where we can. So we'll continue to look for those.
And it's more economical to do that? Is that one of the reasons?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. My last one is carding. And I know there's a big controversy on it, and I have my opinions on it, but I'm not going to go into it. But I guess that, what do you call it, aspect has declined a lot because of the situation. Is that right?
Yeah, and we'll be reporting to the board on the yearly statistics. But most recently, I mentioned at the start, Justice Tulloch is tasked by the government to look at the impact of the legislation. And again, Superintendent Goods-Ritchie led his visit. He was here for 2 days with a team of 3 other people, including 2 lawyers and a retired chief. Met with the board, met with our front line, met with the senior command, the training syllabus, to look at, are there things that need to be done to amend this legislation that will enable officers to do their job better without trampling on the constitutional right.
Oh, it's a work in progress, isn't it?
It is, and I'm hopeful with Justice Tulloch's review. He's a very, I said this to him, it sounds ironic, he's a man who can come up with a balanced opinion. He's a judge, but he does that, and that's in a number of competing interests.
Okay, well, thank you for all of the stuff you've done today.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Conley. Councillor Pasuta.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and good afternoon, Eric, Chief.
Oh, that's good.
I have a series of questions and a couple comments here, but if I may, the horses, they're still on board?
Correct.
Still using them? That pilot started, it was a pilot started back in 2008, I believe, and it's continued on. How many horses do we have now in the stable? 5.
You've got to rotate them in and out. Their general lifespan, thank you very much. The general lifespan, as I understand, is about 15 to 18 years. I'm not a farmer, so I rely on others. And also in their context, how they're used, walking around in all this weather and stuff. But so to your point, it's a low-cost investment. We do still focus on operational requirements first. I do know Councillor Jackson mentioned coming out to community events. We will do that. But again, we try and disperse them around the city. So, you know, one of the uses, for example, was when we were having sexual assaults in the rail trail. So you have the horse out, you got a much better view of the situation. Obviously, people pay attention. It makes them feel safer. We also had our action dispensed. But in any of those contexts, we will use them. Hess Village continues to be an area where we use them on a regular basis. But actually, all the other entertainment districts and restaurant districts as well. So I'd agree. We think it's operationally sound. We also think from a standpoint of community engagement, and I'll just flip to my last picture here. Make the point. There's the kids petting the horse, and I know it's not a petting zoo. That's not the point. It's that they will approach, speak to the officer. You can engage in a quick conversation. When I was down when the tall ships were visiting, our MPU officer was there. It was, you know, there's a huge lineup, but it was all age groups. And then that gives you an opportunity to talk about whether it's traffic or crime and, you know, target hardening. There's a whole range of topics. It can just be general conversation. So we do focus on that. It almost looks like he's waving with his hand to stay away, but he's not. I know that, having seen them. But again, it's people know what that means. In my view, it's quite regal still, and the horses are, in my view, very impressive. We tried to match them up. That was, again, Deputy Leenertz trying to match up the Percherons, but they're impressive, and it makes contact with the community.
They're a good thing. Don't lose them.
Okay.
Good for that. Through Mr. Deputy Mayor, we talk about traffic and accidents. I drive a pickup truck, or several different pickup trucks. You sit up high, you see down. People are texting or on the phone all the time. And Bluetooth is Bluetooth, but on the phone more and more. And like I can come in the morning and it's 32 kilometers to come down Highway 6 or I come Brock Road. There's so many people on the phone. And I don't know if you're officers, I don't know, maybe you need to get a pickup truck or two. And they would be pretty beneficial, but you can actually see down into the cars.
Yep.
Or if you're sitting at the lights on Highway 6 and you're waiting and you're a couple of cars ahead of you, and they sit there, lights green, they're sitting and sitting until they get the horn. And at different times you'll see them come waver across the road, across the white line, the yellow line. It's maybe something to think of. Councillor Ferguson, being from the rural too, and Farm Boy, think about a couple of pickup trucks for the service to get them out there.
I can actually speak to that if you like, Councillor.
Sure.
So we're actually making a transition to more SUVs. The price point between a cruiser and an SUV has been coming down. A couple of reasons. One is the reliability for repairs, because it's kind of a banner year, so to speak, for recall from all three of the major car companies. Not a good thing. We want to keep our vehicles in service. I did have an Explorer previously. When it went out of my flow, I actually gave it to traffic for exactly that reason. Because you can pull up beside, you're at the right height, you can see down inside, get the evidence, stop the person. They go, oh, yes, you were on the phone. I saw you on the phone. So there will be more. I believe we're going to have, Dan, 35 by next year? 35. We have, I believe, 15 and then 20 coming, or is it 20 and 15? 20 and 10, so 30. I don't want to overestimate. Of the SUVs for patrol,